Hi everyone, welcome to Cartoonology. I hope you're all doing well. Today, I want to argue that SpongeBob SquarePants has produced genuinely disturbing episodes that create real unease through atmosphere, psychological tension, and horror storytelling techniques. What makes these episodes unsettling isn't just darkness or scares, it's how they use sound design, visual distortion, emotional isolation, and unexpected tonal shifts in a show about a cheerful sponge. By examining these techniques, we can understand why certain episodes have haunted viewers for decades. But before we begin, I'd just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It's completely free, and it really helps us improve the videos for this wonderful community we've managed to build. Anyway, that's enough. Let's begin. Nasty Patty, when murder comedy goes too far. When you sit down to watch SpongeBob SquarePants, you expect certain things. You expect silly jokes and bright colors, and maybe some physical comedy where Squidward gets hurt. What you don't expect is an entire episode structured around two characters believing they've committed murder and trying to hide a dead body. But that's exactly what Nasty Patty gives you, and it's one of the first times the show really pushed into genuinely dark territory. The episode comes from season 3, which aired in 2002. By this point, the show had established its style and its characters. Everyone knew who SpongeBob was and what kind of show this was supposed to be. So when Nasty Patty aired, it caught a lot of people off guard. The setup seems innocent enough at first. A health inspector comes to the Krusty Krab to check if the restaurant is following proper food safety rules. Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob are nervous because they want to pass the inspection and keep the restaurant open. But then they hear a news report on the radio. The report warns that a fake health inspector is going around to restaurants, pretending to be official so he can get free food. Mr. Krabs immediately assumes that their health inspector must be this con artist. He gets angry at the idea that someone is trying to scam him out of free food. In Mr. Krabs' mind, this is basically theft, and he's not going to let it happen. So Mr. Krabs comes up with a plan. If this health inspector wants free food, they'll give him free food, but they'll make the most disgusting Krabby Patty they can possibly create. They'll give him something so gross that he'll regret ever trying to scam the Krusty Krab. SpongeBob is hesitant at first, because making a bad Krabby Patty goes against everything he believes in. But Mr. Krabs convinces him that this is justice, that they're teaching a scammer a lesson. What follows is one of the most memorably gross sequences in SpongeBob history. They take a regular Krabby Patty and they just destroy it. They drop it on the floor and step on it. They leave it under the heat lamp until it's burnt and dried out. SpongeBob accidentally puts his nose in it at one point. There's even a moment where the patty ends up in the toilet somehow. Every disgusting thing that could happen to food happens to this patty. The visuals here are important because they set up what's coming. The show is being more graphic than usual about showing filth and contamination. The patty isn't just bad, it's genuinely revolting. The animators put detail into making it look as unappetizing as possible. There are flies buzzing around it. It's green and brown and covered in things you can't quite identify. Just looking at it makes you uncomfortable. They serve this horrible patty to the health inspector, and he takes a bite. He chews it and swallows it, and for a moment, nothing happens. But then he starts choking. He's gagging and clutching his throat, and SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs watch in horror as he collapses to the floor. He falls face down and stops moving. There's no sound. He's completely still. Now, here's where the episode takes its darkest turn. SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs genuinely believe they have killed this man. They think the Nasty Patty was so disgusting that it killed him. And instead of calling for help or checking if he's okay, they immediately jump to trying to hide what happened. This is where the episode stops being about food poisoning and becomes about two characters trying to cover up what they think is a murder. The tone shift is dramatic. The bright colors of the Krusty Krab suddenly feel sinister. The cheerful music stops. Everything becomes about paranoia and fear. Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob are whispering to each other, looking around nervously, trying to figure out how to dispose of the body. They're not acting like cartoon characters anymore. They're acting like criminals. They decide they need to bury the health inspector somewhere no one will find him. But first they have to get him out of the restaurant without anyone seeing. This leads to a sequence that plays out like something from a crime thriller. They wrap him up and try to sneak him out the back door. But every time they try to move him, something goes wrong. Someone walks by and they have to hide. A car pulls up and they have to duck down. The tension builds as they keep almost getting caught. What makes this sequence genuinely disturbing is how seriously the show plays it. This isn't played for laughs in the usual SpongeBob way. The joke isn't that they're being silly or overreacting. The joke is watching them genuinely panic as they try to hide what they think is a corpse. The humor comes from their guilt and fear, which is a much darker kind of comedy than the show usually attempts. There's a scene where they're trying to carry the health inspector's body through the restaurant, and he's completely limp and heavy. They struggle with the weight. His arms and legs dangle in ways that feel too realistic. The show is actually depicting what it would look like to move a dead body, and they're doing it in detail. For a kids' show, this is remarkably dark material. At one point, they think they hear police sirens. Every sound makes them jump. Every shadow looks like someone coming to catch them. The episode creates real paranoia and shows how guilt affects people. SpongeBob starts seeing things that aren't there. He's convinced everyone knows what they did. The psychological aspect of the episode is more developed than you'd expect from a cartoon about a talking sponge. The rain starts falling, which adds to the oppressive atmosphere. Everything is dark and wet. The colors are muted compared to typical SpongeBob episodes. The sky is gray. The Krusty Krab looks dingy and depressing instead of bright and welcoming. Even the visual style of the episode is telling you that something is wrong, that this isn't the show you usually watch. They finally get the health inspector outside and try to bury him, but the ground is too hard to dig. They can't figure out where to put him. Every plan they come up with falls apart. And through all of this, the health inspector just lies there, completely motionless. The show never lets you forget that there's supposedly a dead body that these characters are trying to hide. The resolution comes when the real news broadcasts that they've caught the actual fake health inspector. This means the man at the Krusty Krab was the legitimate health inspector all along. Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob just tried to poison and then hide an innocent man doing his job. This should make them feel better, but instead it makes things worse, because now they've committed these terrible acts against someone who didn't deserve it at all. Then the health inspector wakes up. He wasn't dead, he was just unconscious. But here's the thing, SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs don't know this at first. When he starts moving, they think they're seeing a zombie or a ghost. They scream and run away in terror. The episode ends with them still thinking something supernatural is happening, never actually learning that the health inspector was fine the whole time. What makes Nasty Patty disturbing isn't just the premise of thinking you've killed someone, it's how thoroughly the episode commits to that premise. Other shows might do this as a quick joke, where characters briefly panic and then realize everything is fine. But this episode spends most of its runtime with SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs genuinely believing they're murderers and acting accordingly. The episode also reveals something dark about both characters. Mr. Krabs is so cheap and so protective of his money that he's willing to potentially poison someone just to avoid giving away free food. And SpongeBob, who's usually so pure and good-hearted, goes along with it. He helps create the Nasty Patty. He helps try to hide the body. His morals completely crumble under pressure from Mr. Krabs. There's also something disturbing about how quickly they jump to cover-up mode instead of help mode. The health inspector collapses, and their first instinct isn't to call an ambulance or check if he's breathing. Their first instinct is to protect themselves and hide what happened. It shows a selfishness and a darkness in these characters that the show doesn't usually explore. The episode aired during a time when SpongeBob was at its creative peak. Season 3 is considered one of the best seasons, full of classic episodes that fans still love today. But Nasty Patty stands out even among great episodes because it's so tonally different from everything around it. You can watch 3 normal, silly SpongeBob episodes, and then this one comes on, and it feels like you've switched to a different show. Critics and fans have analyzed why this episode works. Part of it is the commitment to the bit. The writers could have resolved the misunderstanding quickly, but they let it play out. They let SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs sit in their guilt and fear for almost the entire episode. This creates sustained tension that's unusual for the show. Another part is the visual storytelling. The animators clearly had fun making this episode look different from normal episodes. The color palette is darker. The character expressions are more exaggerated and genuinely frightened rather than cartoon scared. The health inspector's limp body is animated to look disturbingly realistic. Every visual choice reinforces the dark tone. The episode also works because it taps into a real fear. Most people have had moments where they think they've done something terrible and they panic about the consequences. The episode takes that relatable feeling and pushes it to an extreme. SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs aren't just worried they'll get in trouble. They think they've ended someone's life, and they're spiraling in their attempt to deal with it. What's interesting is how the episode handles the health inspector character himself. He has almost no dialogue after he takes a bite of the patty. He's basically a prop for most of the episode, which is part of what makes it disturbing. He's not a person with thoughts and feelings. He's a problem that needs to be hidden. The show reduces him to an object, and SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs treat him that way. When you watch Nasty Patty as an adult, it hits different than when you watched it as a kid. As a child, you might have just thought it was a silly episode, where SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs get scared. But as an adult, you notice the genuine darkness in the premise. You notice that this is essentially a dark comedy about attempted murder and covering up a crime. It's remarkable that this aired on Nickelodeon. The episode has become a fan favorite specifically because of how dark it is. People remember it years after watching it because it's so different from other episodes. It's one of the first episodes people mention when discussing SpongeBob's darker moments. It set a precedent that the show could go to genuinely unsettling places when it wanted to. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But murder comedy was just one way SpongeBob could disturb its audience. Sometimes the horror came from transformation, from watching a character lose their humanity in ways that felt too real for a kid's cartoon. Section 2. I Was a Teenage Gary. Body horror for kids. There's something uniquely disturbing about transformation horror. Watching a character slowly lose their humanity and become something else taps into primal fears that go back to ancient storytelling. Werewolf myths, vampire legends, and other shapeshifter stories all play with this same anxiety about losing control of your own body. So when SpongeBob SquarePants decided to do an episode about Squidward transforming into a snail, they were working with genuinely dark material, even if they wrapped it in cartoon humor. I Was a Teenage Gary comes from Season 1, Episode 13, which aired in 1999 during the show's first year. This was early SpongeBob, when the show was still figuring out its identity and testing what it could get away with. The episode starts innocently enough, with SpongeBob getting ready to go to a jellyfishing convention with Patrick. He's excited and happy, looking forward to a fun weekend with his best friend. But before he leaves, SpongeBob needs someone to take care of Gary while he's gone. Gary is his pet snail, and like any pet, Gary needs food and attention. SpongeBob asks Squidward to watch Gary for the weekend. Squidward really doesn't want to do this. He finds the whole thing annoying and beneath him. But SpongeBob pleads with him, and eventually Squidward agrees, probably just to make SpongeBob stop bothering him. SpongeBob leaves very clear instructions. Gary needs to be fed once a day. That's it. It's simple. Feed the snail once a day. Squidward confirms he understands, and SpongeBob goes off to his jellyfishing convention, feeling confident that Gary will be fine. This setup is important because it establishes that what happens next is entirely Squidward's fault. He had one simple job, and he's about to fail at it spectacularly. The weekend passes, and Squidward completely forgets about Gary. He's so self-absorbed and unconcerned about anyone but himself that he just goes about his normal routine without thinking about the snail he's supposed to be caring for. He plays his clarinet badly. He tends his garden. He does all his normal Squidward activities. Meanwhile, Gary is sitting in SpongeBob's house, getting hungrier and hungrier. When SpongeBob comes home from his trip, he's happy and relaxed. He calls out to Gary, expecting his usual enthusiastic greeting. But Gary doesn't come. SpongeBob finds him lying in his shell, weak and sick from not being fed for 3 days. Gary makes these pitiful meowing sounds that actually sound painful. The show doesn't make this cute or funny. They make it genuinely sad and concerning. SpongeBob rushes Gary to the doctor, and the doctor explains that Gary is sick because he wasn't fed. He needs medication to recover. The doctor gives SpongeBob a syringe filled with snail plasma that needs to be injected into Gary once a day until he's better. SpongeBob is determined to nurse Gary back to health and make up for Squidward's neglect. But here's where things start to go wrong. SpongeBob is trying to give Gary his shot, and Squidward comes over to see how Gary is doing. Probably feeling guilty about forgetting to feed him, Squidward is asking questions and getting in the way. In the confusion and distraction, SpongeBob accidentally injects the snail plasma into Squidward instead of Gary. The needle goes into Squidward's body, and he receives a full dose of snail plasma meant for an actual snail. Squidward feels the injection and asks what just happened, but SpongeBob doesn't immediately realize his mistake. It's not until later that SpongeBob notices Gary didn't get his medicine and figures out what happened. By then, it's too late. The snail plasma is in Squidward's system. At first, nothing happens. Squidward goes home feeling fine. He goes to bed like normal. But during the night, the transformation begins. This is where the episode shifts from sitcom comedy into genuine body horror. The show takes its time showing Squidward's slow transformation into a snail, and they don't shy away from making it unsettling. The first sign is that Squidward wakes up in the morning and notices his eyes feel weird. He goes to the bathroom mirror to check, and his eyes have become snail eyes. They're on stalks now, bulging out from his head like Gary's eyes. Squidward is horrified. He touches them, and they're real. This isn't a dream or a hallucination. His body is physically changing. The episode uses classic horror transformation visual language here. The mirror reveal is straight out of werewolf movies, where the character sees themselves changing and realizes something terrible is happening to them. Squidward's reaction is pure fear and confusion. He doesn't understand what's happening or why. All he knows is that his body is doing things it's not supposed to do. As the day goes on, more changes happen. Squidward starts moving slower, the way a snail moves. His skin begins to take on a slimy quality. He starts craving snail food. Each new change is shown in detail, with Squidward becoming increasingly panicked as he realizes he's losing his humanity. The transformation isn't instant or magical. It's gradual and physical, which makes it feel more real and more disturbing. There's a scene where Squidward is trying to eat regular food and he can't. His body rejects it because he's becoming more snail than octopus. He needs snail food now. This loss of basic abilities is terrifying when you think about it. Imagine not being able to eat the food you've eaten your whole life because your body has fundamentally changed. The episode captures that helplessness really effectively. The most disturbing part of the transformation is watching Squidward lose his ability to speak. His voice becomes garbled and unclear. Eventually, all he can do is make the meowing sounds that snails make in the SpongeBob universe. This loss of communication is deeply unsettling because it represents the final stage of losing his humanity. When he can't speak anymore, he can't ask for help. He can't explain what's happening. He's trapped inside a body that's no longer his own. The visual design of Squidward's snail form is intentionally grotesque. The animators didn't try to make it cute or funny. They made it look wrong. Squidward's snail form has his facial features stretched and distorted onto a snail body. It's uncanny valley horror, where something looks almost right, but wrong enough to be disturbing. You can still see that it's Squidward, but he's been twisted into something that shouldn't exist. By the time the transformation is complete, Squidward is fully a snail. He's lost everything that made him Squidward. He can't play his clarinet. He can't live in his house. He can't complain about SpongeBob or do any of the things that define his character. He's been reduced to a mindless snail, crawling on the ground and meowing. The episode shows the complete destruction of a character's identity. SpongeBob eventually finds Snail Squidward and realizes what happened. He's horrified and feels incredibly guilty that his mistake did this to Squidward. He tries to figure out how to fix it, but the episode doesn't give an easy answer. The transformation seems permanent. Squidward might be stuck like this forever, because of an accident that wasn't even his fault. The ending of the episode involves SpongeBob also transforming into a snail in a misguided attempt to make Squidward feel better about his transformation. If they're both snails, maybe it won't be so bad. This is classic SpongeBob logic, where he tries to fix problems through pure friendship and optimism. But even this gets a dark twist. The final scene shows SpongeBob and Squidward as snails, crawling together while Gary watches them. Then it cuts to the next morning, where everything is back to normal. SpongeBob and Squidward are both back in their regular forms, with no explanation of how they changed back. The episode just ends with them being normal again, as if the whole transformation never happened. This reset ending is actually more unsettling than if the episode had explained how they changed back. It suggests that everything we just watched was meaningless. The horror and the transformation and the loss of identity didn't matter because it all got undone. Or maybe it's suggesting that they're in a nightmare loop where this could happen again at any time. The ambiguity makes it worse. What makes I Was a Teenage Gary genuinely disturbing is how much it commits to the horror of transformation. Other cartoons might have a character turn into an animal and play it for laughs the whole time. They'd make the character goofy in their new form. But this episode treats Squidward's transformation as body horror. The show wants you to feel how awful this would be, to imagine yourself slowly losing control of your own body. The episode's title is a reference to old horror movies like I Was a Teenage Werewolf and I Was a Teenage Frankenstein. These were 1950s monster movies aimed at teenagers that played with transformation and identity fears. By referencing these films, SpongeBob is openly acknowledging that they're making a horror episode. They're telling viewers up front that this is going to be darker than usual. The sound design in this episode deserves attention too. The music gets creepier as Squidward's transformation progresses. There are discordant notes and unsettling sounds that wouldn't be out of place in an actual horror movie. When Squidward loses his voice and can only make snail sounds, those sounds are mixed to sound genuinely disturbing rather than cute. Everything about the audio is designed to make you uncomfortable. From a story perspective, the episode is about consequences and responsibility. Squidward neglected Gary, which led to SpongeBob needing medicine, which led to the accidental injection. It's a chain of events where multiple people made mistakes. But the punishment Squidward receives, losing his entire identity and humanity, is way out of proportion to his crime of forgetting to feed a snail. The episode shows how small mistakes can spiral into horrible outcomes. The episode also plays with the fear of medical accidents. Squidward didn't choose to inject himself with snail plasma. It happened by accident, and now he's dealing with consequences he never agreed to. This taps into real anxieties people have about medical mistakes and things going wrong with their bodies through no fault of their own. It's a surprisingly mature fear for a kids' show to explore. When fans discuss disturbing SpongeBob episodes, I Was a Teenage Gary always comes up. People remember the transformation sequence years after watching it. They remember how it made them feel uncomfortable in a way that other SpongeBob episodes didn't. The episode proved that the show could do genuine horror when it wanted to, even within the constraints of being a Nickelodeon cartoon. The episode is also notable for being early in the show's run. This was only the 13th episode ever made. The creators were still establishing what SpongeBob could be, and they decided that horror transformation was on the table. This set a precedent for future dark episodes and showed that the show wasn't going to limit itself to safe, predictable stories. Looking back at I Was a Teenage Gary from an adult perspective, it's remarkable how dark it actually is. As a kid, you might have just thought it was a weird episode where Squidward turns into a snail. But as an adult, you can appreciate how thoroughly the episode commits to body horror. You can see the influences from classic horror cinema. You can recognize the genuine fear in Squidward's transformation and loss of self. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Transformation horror showed how a character could lose themselves. But SpongeBob found other ways to create dread. Sometimes all it took was the right atmosphere, the right setting, and one perfectly timed scare to create an episode that would haunt viewers for years. Section 3. Graveyard Shift. Horror comedy done right. In October 2002, Season 2 of SpongeBob aired an episode that would become one of the most beloved and frequently referenced episodes in the entire series. Graveyard Shift is interesting because it's an episode that deliberately sets out to be scary, but it does so in a way that balances genuine tension with comedy. The episode shows how SpongeBob could create atmosphere and build suspense while still being entertaining and funny. It's a masterclass in horror comedy that works for both children and adults. The episode begins with Mr. Krabs having one of his typical money-obsessed ideas. He's looking at the Krusty Krab at night and realizes something. The restaurant closes at 6 in the evening, which means there are 18 hours every day when he's not making money. To Mr. Krabs, this is unacceptable. He sees those nighttime hours as wasted profit. So he decides that the Krusty Krab will now be open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This means SpongeBob and Squidward will have to work the night shift. SpongeBob is initially excited about this. He loves working at the Krusty Krab and sees the night shift as just another opportunity to do his job. Squidward, predictably, is miserable about the whole thing. He doesn't want to work extra hours, especially not at night, when he'd rather be home sleeping or practicing his clarinet. The contrast between their attitudes sets up the dynamic that will drive the rest of the episode. The first night shift begins, and immediately things feel different. The Krusty Krab looks different at night. The lighting is dimmer and the shadows are longer. The restaurant that seems so cheerful and busy during the day feels empty and slightly creepy when it's dark outside and there are no customers. The show does a good job of establishing that nighttime changes the atmosphere of familiar places. Squidward is bored and annoyed, sitting at the register with nothing to do. SpongeBob is cleaning and staying busy, but even he starts to notice how quiet and strange everything feels. The usual sounds of the restaurant are gone. There's no sizzling from the grill, no chatter from customers, no familiar chaos. Just silence and the occasional creak of the building settling. This is when Squidward decides to mess with SpongeBob. He's bored, and he wants entertainment. And the easiest way to entertain himself is to scare his gullible coworker. Squidward starts telling SpongeBob a story, claiming it's a true tale about something that happened at the Krusty Krab years ago. He calls the story The Tale of the Hash-Slinging Slasher. The way Squidward tells this story is important to how the episode works. He speaks in a dramatic, ominous voice. He pauses for effect. He uses specific details to make the story feel real. According to Squidward, there was once a fry cook who worked at the Krusty Krab. He wasn't very good at his job. One night, he accidentally cut off his own hand while making a Krabby Patty. The hand was replaced with a rusty spatula. But that same night, as the fry cook was walking home, he was hit by a bus. The bus dragged his body for several blocks, and then the bus backed up over him to finish him off. Squidward tells all of this with relish, enjoying how disturbed SpongeBob is becoming. SpongeBob is hanging on every word, his eyes getting wider and his face showing increasing fear. Squidward continues the story. He explains that the ghost of the hash-slinging slasher returns to the Krusty Krab on certain nights. There are 3 signs that warn you he's coming. First, the lights will flicker on and off. Second, the phone will ring and there will be nobody on the other end. Third, the hash-slinging slasher will arrive in a ghostly bus and walk slowly toward the restaurant to exact his revenge. SpongeBob is now thoroughly terrified. He's shaking and clearly believing every word of this obviously made-up story. Squidward is pleased with himself for scaring SpongeBob so effectively. He thinks he's going to have a good laugh watching SpongeBob jump at shadows all night. But then something happens that Squidward didn't plan for. The lights flicker. Just like in the story. Both SpongeBob and Squidward notice this. Squidward tries to play it off as a coincidence, but even he looks slightly unsettled. Then the phone rings. Squidward answers it, and there's no one on the other end. Just like in the story. Now Squidward is starting to get nervous. These are supposed to be made-up details from a fake ghost story. but they're actually happening. SpongeBob and Squidward look out the window. In the distance, they can see a figure approaching the restaurant. The figure is walking slowly and deliberately toward the Krusty Krab. It's getting closer with each passing moment. Both of them are now genuinely scared. Squidward's prank has backfired spectacularly because the things he made up are actually occurring. What makes this sequence work so well is how the episode builds tension. The show takes its time showing the mysterious figure getting closer. We see it from a distance at first, just a silhouette in the darkness. Then we see it getting nearer, walking with a strange, jerky gait. The music becomes more ominous. SpongeBob and Squidward are frozen in fear, unable to do anything but watch this figure approach. The animation in these scenes is particularly effective. The show uses dramatic lighting with harsh shadows. The colors are muted compared to typical SpongeBob episodes. Everything looks slightly green and sickly. The Krusty Krab, which is normally bright and welcoming, now looks like the perfect setting for a horror story. The animators understood that changing the lighting and color palette could completely transform how a familiar location feels. As the figure gets closer, SpongeBob and Squidward can make out more details. It appears to be wearing the same outfit that Squidward described the hash-slinging slasher wearing. One of its arms seems to be raised, possibly holding a spatula. Every detail matches the story Squidward told. Both characters are now convinced that the hash-slinging slasher is real, and he's coming for them. They panic and try to figure out what to do. Should they run? Should they hide? Should they try to fight this ghost? SpongeBob suggests they try to reason with the hash-slinging slasher, to apologize for whatever wrong he thinks was done to him. Squidward thinks this is stupid, but he's too scared to come up with a better plan. They're both just standing there, watching this figure get closer and closer to the door. The tension reaches its peak when the figure finally arrives at the Krusty Krab. The door opens slowly. The figure steps inside. SpongeBob and Squidward are huddled together in terror, waiting for something horrible to happen. And then the reveal comes that completely changes the tone of the entire episode. The mysterious figure is just a random fish looking for a job application. He wants to work at the Krusty Krab and heard they were open at night now. He's completely normal and harmless. His raised spatula was just him waving hello. All the signs from Squidward's story were just coincidences. The lights flickered because of electrical problems. The phone rang with no one there because someone dialed the wrong number and hung up. The ominous approach was just a regular person walking to a restaurant. SpongeBob and Squidward are flooded with relief. They laugh at themselves for being so scared of nothing. Squidward admits he made the whole story up, and there's no such thing as the hash-slinging slasher. They both feel silly for getting so worked up over a ghost story and some coincidences. Everything is fine. The tension is broken, and things seem to be back to normal. But then the lights flicker again. And this time, when they look toward the light switch, they see something that makes no sense. Count Orlok, from the 1922 silent horror film Nosferatu, is standing there, flicking the light switch on and off. He has the distinctive appearance from that famous vampire movie, with the bald head, pointed ears, and long, creepy fingers. He grins at them, and then the episode ends. This final moment is what makes Graveyard Shift so memorable and so perfect. The episode built up tension, released it with a logical explanation, and then hit you with one more absurd scare that makes no sense whatsoever. Count Orlok has nothing to do with the hash-slinging slasher story. He has no reason to be in the Krusty Krab. His presence isn't explained or acknowledged. He's just there, being creepy, flicking the light switch. The brilliance of this ending is that it's completely random and surreal, which fits SpongeBob's usual style, but it's also genuinely unsettling, because Count Orlok is a figure from actual horror cinema. The show is referencing a real horror movie from 1922, introducing children to this iconic vampire image in the most unexpected way possible. It's comedy and horror combined perfectly. What makes Graveyard Shift work as a disturbing episode is how it plays with the viewer's expectations. The episode trains you to expect certain things. You think the hash-slinging slasher is going to be real. You think there's going to be a supernatural threat. Then the show reveals it was all nothing, and you feel relieved. But then it pulls the rug out one more time with something even weirder than what you originally expected. The episode also works because it takes place entirely at night in a single location. This creates a confined, claustrophobic feeling. SpongeBob and Squidward are trapped at the Krusty Krab with nowhere to go. They can't leave because they have to work. This limitation makes the fear feel more real because they can't escape whatever might be coming for them. The hash-slinging slasher story itself is a good example of how to tell a scary story. Squidward includes specific details like the spatula replacing the hand and the bus backing up over the body. These gruesome details make the story more vivid and memorable. He also establishes clear rules about the 3 signs that warn of the slasher's arrival. This structure makes the supernatural threat feel organized and inevitable. The episode references classic horror storytelling techniques throughout. The setup of telling a scary story that comes true is a common horror trope. The slow build of tension as the mysterious figure approaches is classic suspense filmmaking. The false relief followed by a final scare is a technique horror movies use all the time. SpongeBob is using the language of horror cinema in a cartoon format. The voice acting in this episode deserves recognition too. Tom Kenny makes SpongeBob sound genuinely frightened, not just cartoon scared. His voice gets higher and shakier as the tension builds. Roger Bumpus gives Squidward layers of emotion, starting with smug amusement at scaring SpongeBob, then moving to nervousness, then to real fear, then to relief, and finally to confusion at the Nosferatu appearance. The performances sell the emotional journey. The music and sound design are crucial to creating the episode's atmosphere. The background music becomes more ominous as the story progresses. There are stings and musical cues that emphasize scary moments. The sound of the phone ringing feels more sinister because of the context. The creaking and ambient sounds of the empty restaurant at night add to the unsettling mood. Graveyard Shift has become one of the most quoted and referenced SpongeBob episodes. The hash-slinging slasher became part of the show's mythology. Fans still make jokes about the tongue twister that Squidward does while telling the story, where he fumbles through various mispronunciations before getting to hash-slinging slasher. The Nosferatu appearance has become an iconic SpongeBob moment that gets referenced constantly in memes and online discussions. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But atmospheric horror at night was just one approach the show could take. Sometimes the fear came from being in the wrong place during the wrong time. Somewhere that should feel safe, but somehow doesn't. Section 4. Rock Bottom. The Anxiety of Being Lost. In March 2000, during the first season of SpongeBob SquarePants, the show aired an episode that tapped into a very specific and very universal fear. Rock Bottom is about being lost in an unfamiliar place where you don't understand the rules and can't communicate with anyone. It's about the anxiety of being stranded somewhere strange with no clear way to get home. For an episode from a kid's cartoon, it creates a remarkably accurate feeling of helplessness and disorientation that many viewers found genuinely disturbing. The episode begins innocently enough. SpongeBob and Patrick decide to visit an amusement park called Glove World. This is a theme park shaped like a giant glove where all the rides and attractions are glove-themed. They spend the day having fun, riding roller coasters, playing games, and enjoying themselves. Everything is bright and cheerful and normal. This happy beginning makes the contrast with what comes later even more stark. When the day ends and it's time to go home, SpongeBob and Patrick head to the bus stop to catch their bus back to Bikini Bottom. But they're not paying attention, and they board the wrong bus. Instead of going up to Bikini Bottom, the bus goes down, deeper into the ocean, taking them to a place they've never been before. By the time they realize their mistake, they're far from home in a completely unfamiliar area. The bus drops them off in a place called Rock Bottom. From the moment SpongeBob and Patrick step off the bus, everything feels wrong. Rock Bottom is a deep-sea community located in a trench far below Bikini Bottom. The pressure down here is different. The darkness is more intense. The entire environment is hostile and alien compared to the cheerful world they know. The first thing you notice about Rock Bottom is how it looks. The color palette is completely different from typical SpongeBob episodes. Everything is dark blues, purples, and blacks. There's very little light. The buildings are angular and imposing. The architecture is strange and unsettling. Nothing looks friendly or welcoming. The show establishes immediately, through visuals alone, that this is not a safe place. The residents of Rock Bottom are designed to look distinctly different from the characters in Bikini Bottom. They're deep-sea fish, with features adapted to living in darkness and pressure. Some have glowing appendages, others have huge eyes or strange body shapes. They move differently too, in jerky, unsettling ways. They don't look evil exactly, but they look alien and hard to read. You can't tell if they're friendly or dangerous just by looking at them. The most distinctive feature of Rock Bottom residents is how they speak. They make a raspberry blowing sound between their words, like they're spitting or hissing. Every sentence is interrupted by this pfft sound. For example, they might say, "Hello, pff, how, are, you." This speech pattern makes communication almost impossible for SpongeBob, who doesn't speak this way and can't understand them properly. Patrick gets back on a bus almost immediately, leaving SpongeBob alone in Rock Bottom. This happens so quickly that SpongeBob doesn't even realize Patrick is gone until the bus has already left. Now SpongeBob is completely isolated in this strange place with no friend to help him. This isolation is crucial to the episode's unsettling atmosphere. When you're lost, having someone with you makes it less scary. Being alone makes everything worse. SpongeBob tries to figure out how to get home. He goes to the bus schedule to see when the next bus to Bikini Bottom will arrive. But the bus schedule makes no sense. It's not organized in any logical way. The times seem random. The destinations are listed in an order that doesn't follow any pattern SpongeBob can understand. He can't figure out which bus he needs or when it will come. This is where the episode starts to create real anxiety. SpongeBob is trapped in a place where the basic rules he's used to don't apply. In Bikini Bottom, bus schedules make sense. Here, they don't. The fundamental logic of the world is different, and he doesn't know how to navigate it. This mirrors the real feeling of being in a foreign place where you don't understand the language or the customs. SpongeBob decides to wait at the bus stop for the next bus that might go to Bikini Bottom. While he waits, he tries to interact with the Rock Bottom residents who are also waiting. He tries to ask them questions. He tries to be friendly. But the language barrier makes communication nearly impossible. They respond to him with sentences full of those raspberry sounds, and SpongeBob can't understand what they're saying. The residents aren't actively hostile to SpongeBob, but they're not helpful either. They seem confused by him or indifferent to his presence. They go about their business without acknowledging that SpongeBob is clearly lost and needs help. This indifference is in some ways more unsettling than outright hostility would be. At least if they were mean, SpongeBob would understand the situation. Their blank strangeness is harder to process. Every time a bus arrives at the stop, SpongeBob thinks it might be his chance to get home, but the buses that come are either going to the wrong destination or they leave before he can board. There's a recurring gag where SpongeBob will be looking away for just a moment and a bus will arrive and leave immediately. He keeps missing buses by seconds, which adds to his growing frustration and desperation. One particularly effective sequence shows SpongeBob waiting as night falls in Rock Bottom. The place gets even darker and more ominous. The few lights that exist create harsh shadows. The sounds of Rock Bottom at night are strange and unsettling. SpongeBob sits alone at the bus stop, getting more and more worried that he'll never get home. The show lets this feeling sit and build instead of rushing to resolve it. SpongeBob's anxiety manifests in visible ways. His usually cheerful expression is gone. He looks genuinely scared and overwhelmed. His body language shows defeat and worry. The animation conveys his emotional state through slumped posture and nervous fidgeting. You can see him losing hope as time passes, and he remains stuck in this awful place. There's a scene where SpongeBob thinks he sees his bus arriving, and he runs to catch it, only to realize it's going the wrong way. He chases after it desperately, yelling for it to stop, but it keeps going. The desperation in his voice and his actions shows how much this experience is affecting him. This isn't fun or funny to SpongeBob anymore. He's genuinely distressed. The episode also includes moments where SpongeBob tries to find help in other ways. He goes to a vending machine to buy a candy bar, thinking maybe eating something will make him feel better. But the vending machine is designed in a confusing way, and he can't figure out how to use it. Even simple tasks that would be easy in Bikini Bottom are complicated and frustrating in Rock Bottom. At one point, SpongeBob ends up on a bus that takes him even deeper into Rock Bottom, into an area that's darker and stranger than where he started. He gets off the bus in a panic when he realizes he's going the wrong direction. Now he's even more lost than before, even further from home. The episode shows how trying to fix your situation when you're lost can sometimes make things worse. What makes Rock Bottom genuinely disturbing is how accurately it captures the feeling of being lost and helpless. Many people who watched this episode as children remember feeling genuinely anxious while watching it. The episode tapped into a fear they already had, or introduced them to a new fear about being separated from familiar places and people. Even as a cartoon, the emotional reality of the situation comes through clearly. The color grading and visual style of Rock Bottom creates an oppressive atmosphere throughout the episode. The deep blues and purples make everything look like it's underwater, at a depth where sunlight can't reach. The darkness isn't just the absence of light, it's thick and tangible. You can almost feel the pressure and the cold. The show's artists did an incredible job of making Rock Bottom feel like a real place that you wouldn't want to visit. The sound design adds another layer of unease. The ambient sounds of Rock Bottom are different from Bikini Bottom. There are strange echoes and distant noises that you can't quite identify. The music is minimal and ominous, rather than the cheerful tunes that usually accompany SpongeBob's adventures. Even the silence feels heavy and uncomfortable. The raspberry speech pattern of Rock Bottom residents is particularly effective at creating a communication barrier. It's such a simple idea, just adding a sound between words, but it completely changes how language works. SpongeBob can hear that they're speaking words he should understand, but the raspberry sounds disrupt the flow enough that comprehension becomes difficult. It's a clever way to show language barriers in a format that kids can understand. Eventually, after what feels like hours of being trapped in Rock Bottom, SpongeBob finally manages to get help. A friendly anglerfish resident sees how distressed SpongeBob is and decides to help him. The anglerfish uses their glowing lure to signal a bus, and this bus finally takes SpongeBob home to Bikini Bottom. When SpongeBob arrives back in familiar territory, his relief is palpable. He's so happy to be home that he hugs the ground. The resolution is satisfying because the episode earned it by making SpongeBob really suffer first. You feel his relief because you felt his anxiety. The episode didn't rush through the uncomfortable parts. It let you sit with SpongeBob's fear and confusion and helplessness. This made the happy ending feel more meaningful than if SpongeBob had gotten home easily. Rock Bottom works on multiple levels. For children, it's about the fear of getting separated from your parents or being lost in a store or a crowd. For adults, it's about being in a foreign country where you don't speak the language, or being in a situation where the normal rules you rely on don't apply. The episode captures a universal human experience of disorientation and helplessness. The episode also never explains why Rock Bottom is the way it is. We don't learn why the residents speak differently, or why the bus schedules are confusing, or why everything is so dark and strange. The lack of explanation makes it more unsettling because SpongeBob never gains understanding of this place. It remains alien and incomprehensible to him, which means it remains threatening even after he escapes. Many fans cite Rock Bottom as one of the episodes that stuck with them most from childhood. The specific atmosphere and the feelings it evoked left a lasting impression. People remember the darkness, the strange fish, the raspberry sounds, and most of all, the feeling of being trapped somewhere you don't want to be with no clear way out. The episode also introduced Rock Bottom as a location in the SpongeBob universe that would occasionally appear in later episodes. It became a place associated with being weird, dark, and unsettling. Whenever the show wanted to indicate that characters had gone somewhere bad or dangerous, sending them to Rock Bottom was a shorthand the audience understood. What's remarkable about Rock Bottom is that it's from season 1, when the show was still establishing itself. The creators were confident enough this early to do an episode with such a different tone and atmosphere. They trusted that they could take SpongeBob to a dark, uncomfortable place and bring him back without losing the audience. This creative boldness is part of what made early SpongeBob special. The episode is also notable for how little dialogue SpongeBob has. Much of the runtime is SpongeBob silently waiting, watching, trying to figure things out. Tom Kenny's voice acting conveys SpongeBob's emotions through sounds and expressions rather than words. This makes the episode feel more cinematic and allows the visuals and atmosphere to carry more of the storytelling weight. Rock Bottom represents a different kind of disturbing than the other episodes we've discussed. It's not about violence or transformation or horror scares. It's about anxiety and disorientation. It's psychological rather than physical. The episode makes you feel uncomfortable, not because something bad happens to SpongeBob, but because he's stuck in a situation where he feels powerless and lost. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Being lost in a strange place created one type of fear, but SpongeBob could disturb viewers in even more subtle ways. Sometimes the most unsettling episodes were the ones where familiar places and relationships became twisted, where the people you knew started acting wrong. Section 5. One-course meal. Psychological torment as comedy. In March 2010, during Season 7 of SpongeBob SquarePants, the show aired an episode that would become one of the most controversial and widely criticized in its entire run. One-course meal is disturbing not because of horror elements or transformation sequences, but because it depicts psychological abuse being played for comedy. The episode shows one character deliberately tormenting another character to the point of wanting to end his own life, and it treats this as funny rather than concerning. This episode represents a turning point in how dark SpongeBob was willing to go with its humor. The episode begins with Plankton, the tiny organism who runs the chum bucket and constantly tries to steal the Krabby Patty secret formula. Plankton has spent years attempting to get this formula through various schemes, none of which have succeeded. He's SpongeBob's antagonist in many episodes, always plotting and planning new ways to steal what he wants. In most episodes, Plankton is portrayed as a villain, but a somewhat sympathetic one. He's small, he's unsuccessful, and his relationship with his computer wife Karen shows he has some depth beyond just being evil. But in One-Course Meal, we learn something new about Plankton that will drive the entire plot. He has a severe phobia of whales. This fear is so intense that even seeing or hearing a whale sends Plankton into complete panic. The episode doesn't explain where this fear came from or why it's so extreme. It's just established as a fact about his character that will be exploited throughout the episode. Mr. Krabs discovers Plankton's whale phobia entirely by accident. Peril, Mr. Krabs' teenage daughter, who is a whale, happens to be near the Krusty Krab when Plankton is attempting one of his schemes. Plankton sees Peril and immediately freezes in terror. He starts screaming and runs away as fast as his tiny legs can carry him. Mr. Krabs witnesses this reaction and immediately understands what's happening. Plankton is terrified of whales. For most people, discovering that someone has a severe phobia would prompt sympathy or at least neutrality. You might feel bad for the person dealing with such intense fear. You certainly wouldn't think to use that fear against them. But Mr. Krabs sees Plankton's phobia as an opportunity. He realizes he can use this fear to keep Plankton away from the Krusty Krab permanently. He can weaponize Plankton's trauma for his own benefit. Mr. Krabs decides to dress up in a whale costume and scare Plankton. He puts on a costume that makes him look like a whale and he goes to the chum bucket to terrify his business rival. When Plankton sees what he thinks is a real whale coming toward him, he has a complete panic attack. He screams, he cries, he begs for mercy. His fear is portrayed as genuine and extreme. The show makes it clear that Plankton is experiencing real terror. But instead of scaring Plankton once and leaving it at that, Mr. Krabs decides to continue. He keeps coming back to scare Plankton over and over again. Every time Plankton starts to calm down and try to go about his day, Mr. Krabs appears in the whale costume to terrify him again. This becomes a pattern. Mr. Krabs is systematically traumatizing Plankton through repeated exposure to his worst fear. The episode shows the psychological toll this takes on Plankton. He becomes afraid to leave his restaurant. He can't sleep because he's worried a whale will appear. He starts seeing whales everywhere, even when they're not there. His mental state deteriorates rapidly under the constant stress and fear. The show depicts someone having a mental breakdown, and it's played for laughs rather than being treated as serious. Plankton tries to tell his computer wife Karen what's happening, but she doesn't believe him or doesn't take it seriously. She thinks he's being dramatic or making excuses. This means Plankton has no support system and no one to help him deal with what he's experiencing. He's completely alone in his suffering, which makes the situation even more cruel. As the torment continues, Plankton reaches a breaking point. He becomes so traumatized and so desperate to escape his fear that he decides he doesn't want to live anymore. The episode shows Plankton lying down in the middle of the road, waiting for a car to run him over. He's attempting suicide. He says out loud that he wants to be run over, that he can't take the fear anymore, that death would be better than continuing to live like this. This is an incredibly dark moment for a children's cartoon. The show is depicting a character who has been driven to attempt suicide through psychological abuse. Plankton isn't making a dramatic gesture or being silly. He genuinely wants to die because the mental anguish has become unbearable. The episode shows him lying there, waiting for a vehicle to end his life. What makes this even more disturbing is how the episode treats this moment. Mr. Krabs sees Plankton lying in the road and realizes what's happening. But instead of feeling remorse or horror at what his actions have caused, Mr. Krabs is amused. He doesn't feel guilty. He doesn't rush to help. He watches and finds the situation funny. The show frames Mr. Krabs as being in the right and Plankton as being weak or deserving of this treatment. SpongeBob eventually finds out what Mr. Krabs has been doing. You would expect SpongeBob, who is usually kind and empathetic, to be horrified by this revelation. You would expect him to tell Mr. Krabs that tormenting someone to the point of wanting to die is wrong. But that's not what happens. SpongeBob thinks the whole situation is funny too. He laughs about it. He doesn't criticize Mr. Krabs or try to make him stop. The episode does eventually show Plankton getting revenge on Mr. Krabs by exploiting his fear of mimes. It turns out Mr. Krabs has a phobia of mimes, and Plankton uses this to scare Mr. Krabs the same way Mr. Krabs scared him. This is presented as poetic justice, as Plankton giving Mr. Krabs a taste of his own medicine. The two characters end up calling a truce, agreeing not to exploit each other's phobias anymore. But this resolution doesn't fix the fundamental problems with the episode. The fact that Mr. Krabs also has a phobia doesn't make what he did to Plankton any less cruel. Two wrongs don't make a right. And more importantly, the episode never acknowledges that driving someone to attempt suicide is serious and wrong. Mr. Krabs never apologizes. He never shows genuine remorse. He only stops because Plankton found a way to retaliate. What makes one-course meal particularly disturbing is that it represents a shift in how SpongeBob handled conflict between characters. In earlier seasons, characters would be mean to each other or get into conflicts, but there were limits. The show understood that certain lines shouldn't be crossed, even in comedy. But this episode crosses those lines without seeming to recognize that it's doing something wrong. The episode also reflects a larger problem with Season 7 and the surrounding seasons. During this period, the show became meaner. Characters would do genuinely cruel things to each other and face no consequences. The humor stopped being about silly situations and started being about watching characters suffer. One-course meal is an extreme example of this trend, but it's part of a pattern. Fans and critics noticed this shift and spoke out against it. One-course meal became one of the most hated episodes in the entire series. People pointed out that depicting suicide in a children's show was inappropriate. They argued that showing psychological abuse as funny could normalize that behavior for young viewers. They criticized the episode for being mean-spirited and uncomfortable to watch. Mental health advocates also raised concerns about the episode. Depicting a character attempting suicide and having other characters laugh about it sends a terrible message. It suggests that people who are suicidal are being dramatic or weak. It implies that psychological torment is acceptable if the victim is someone you don't like. These are dangerous ideas to present to any audience, but especially to children. The episode also misunderstands what makes conflict funny in comedy. Good comedy often involves characters in conflict, but the conflict needs to be balanced. Both sides need to get wins and losses. The audience needs to be able to root for characters even when they're fighting. But in one-course meal, the conflict is completely one-sided. Mr. Krabs has all the power and uses it to torture Plankton. There's no balance, no fairness, just cruelty. What's particularly frustrating about this episode is that it takes a potentially interesting idea and executes it in the worst possible way. The concept of two business rivals discovering each other's phobias and using them as weapons could have been funny if handled correctly. But the episode goes too far and stays there too long. It lingers on Plankton's suffering and makes that suffering the entire point of the episode. The animation in One-Course Meal doesn't help matters. The episode shows Plankton's terror in detail. His expressions of fear are drawn to look genuinely distressed rather than cartoonishly scared. When he's lying in the road waiting to be run over, the show doesn't make it look silly or exaggerated. It looks like a character who has given up on life. This realistic depiction of mental anguish makes the episode harder to watch. The voice acting also contributes to how disturbing the episode feels. Mr. Lawrence, who voices Plankton, makes the character sound genuinely traumatized and desperate. You can hear the breakdown in his voice. He doesn't play it for laughs. He performs the character as someone in real psychological pain. This makes the contrast even sharper when other characters find the situation funny. Looking at One-Course Meal in the context of SpongeBob's history shows how far the show had drifted from its original tone. Early SpongeBob could be silly and could have conflicts between characters, but it had an underlying kindness. The show cared about its characters and wanted them to be okay. Later SpongeBob, as exemplified by this episode, lost that kindness and replaced it with cruelty. The episode also represents a failure of oversight in the production process. Multiple people had to write, approve, storyboard, animate, and voice this episode. At any point, someone could have said that depicting suicide in a kids' show was going too far, but apparently no one did, or if they did, their concerns were ignored. The episode made it all the way through production and aired on television. After the backlash, Nickelodeon didn't pull the episode from circulation, but it has been aired less frequently than other episodes. It's available on streaming services and DVD sets, but the network seems aware that it's controversial. Some fans have created petitions asking for the episode to be permanently removed from rotation, though these petitions haven't succeeded. The existence of One-Course Meal raises questions about what's appropriate for children's entertainment. Should cartoons be allowed to depict suicide, even if it's in a stylized or comedic context? How much cruelty is too much before an episode stops being funny and starts being disturbing? These are questions without easy answers. But One-Course Meal pushes well past what most people consider acceptable. The episode also demonstrates how the show's treatment of Plankton changed over time. In early seasons, Plankton was a villain, but a sympathetic one. He was small, he was married, he had goals and dreams, even if his methods were wrong. The show lets you understand why he wanted to succeed. But in later seasons like this one, Plankton became a punching bag who existed to suffer. The character lost his dignity and his depth. What makes one-course meal disturbing is how it normalizes psychological abuse. The episode shows a character systematically breaking down another character's mental health and presents this as acceptable because the victim is a villain. But Plankton's status as an antagonist doesn't justify driving him to attempt suicide. The episode fails to recognize that there are limits to how you should treat even your enemies. The episode also fails as comedy because it's not funny. Watching someone be genuinely traumatized repeatedly isn't entertaining. The jokes fall flat because the underlying situation is too cruel to laugh at. Comedy requires a certain amount of distance or absurdity to work, and one-course meal is too realistic in its depiction of psychological torment to be funny. Compared to the disturbing episodes we've discussed previously, one-course meal is disturbing in a different way. Nasty Patty and I Was a Teenage Gary are disturbing because they use horror elements in unexpected ways. Graveyard Shift and Rock Bottom create unsettling atmospheres. But one-course meal is disturbing because it depicts real psychological abuse and treats it as something to laugh at. The discomfort comes from the episode's moral failure rather than from intentional horror storytelling. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But psychological torment through fear was just one way the show could disturb viewers. Sometimes the horror came from losing control of your own mind, from having something invade your thoughts and take over your actions in ways you couldn't resist. Section 6. Earworm, when a song takes control. In July 2011, during Season 7 of SpongeBob SquarePants, the show aired an episode that explored a different kind of horror: the loss of control over your own mind. Earworm is about what happens when a song gets stuck in your head and you can't make it stop. But the episode takes this relatable experience and pushes it to disturbing extremes, showing the song literally taking over SpongeBob's brain and controlling his actions. The episode taps into fears about losing agency over your own thoughts and becoming a prisoner inside your own head. The episode begins with SpongeBob in a good mood, going about his normal day. He's happy and cheerful as usual, ready to work at the Krusty Krab and enjoy his life. But then he hears a song. The song is called Musical Doodle, and it's a simple, catchy tune that Squidward is playing. Squidward performs this song once, just briefly, and then moves on with his day. He doesn't think anything of it. It was just a quick musical moment. But something happens to SpongeBob when he hears this song. It gets stuck in his head immediately and completely. At first, this seems normal and harmless. Everyone has experienced getting a song stuck in their head. You hear a catchy tune, and then you find yourself humming it or thinking about it for the rest of the day. It's annoying, but not dangerous. SpongeBob starts humming Musical Doodle while he works, and it seems like just a minor inconvenience. However, the song doesn't go away. Hours pass, and SpongeBob is still humming it. He can't seem to think about anything else. The song is playing on loop in his mind, over and over and over again. He tries to focus on his work, on making Krabby Patties and serving customers, but the song keeps intruding into his thoughts. Every few seconds, he catches himself humming or singing it again. SpongeBob starts to realize that something is wrong. This isn't just a catchy song that he'll forget about in a few hours. The song is stuck in his head in a way that feels invasive and inescapable. He tries to push it out of his mind, to think about other things, to distract himself with work or conversation. But nothing works. The song keeps coming back, stronger each time. The episode uses visual metaphors to show what's happening inside SpongeBob's brain. We get sequences where the camera goes inside SpongeBob's head, and we see the song represented as an actual physical worm. This musical worm is crawling through SpongeBob's brain, making itself at home in his mind. The imagery is unsettling because it shows the song as a parasite that has infected SpongeBob's thoughts. As the episode continues, the song's control over SpongeBob becomes more complete. He's not just humming it anymore. He's singing it out loud constantly. He can't hold conversations because he keeps interrupting himself to sing musical doodle. He can't do his job properly because the song takes over his actions. His coworkers start to notice that something is seriously wrong with him. SpongeBob becomes increasingly distressed about his situation. He's aware that the song is controlling him, but he can't do anything to stop it. He's trapped inside his own head with this tune playing endlessly. The episode shows him trying various methods to get the song out. He tries singing other songs to replace it. He tries hitting his head to knock the song loose. He tries ignoring it and pretending it's not there. Nothing works. The earworm, as it's called in the episode, starts to change SpongeBob's behavior in more dramatic ways. He begins acting erratically, doing things that don't make sense because the song is overriding his normal decision-making. He's no longer in full control of his own actions. The song is making him do things. This loss of agency is what makes the episode genuinely disturbing. Patrick gets involved when he notices how much SpongeBob is suffering. Patrick tries to help his friend, but he doesn't really understand what's happening. He suggests various solutions that don't work, because Patrick doesn't grasp the severity of the situation. SpongeBob is dealing with something that has invaded his mind and won't leave, and Patrick's simplistic attempts to help are useless. The visual representation of the earworm inside SpongeBob's brain becomes more prominent as the episode goes on. We see the musical worm growing larger and more comfortable inside SpongeBob's head. It's building nests and settling in like it plans to stay forever. The show is using this imagery to represent how the song has completely taken over SpongeBob's mental space. There's no room left for his own thoughts. SpongeBob's desperation grows as the episode continues. He's exhausted from the constant mental intrusion. He hasn't been able to sleep because the song keeps playing in his head, even when he tries to rest. He can't eat properly because he can't focus on anything except the song. His quality of life has deteriorated dramatically because of this mental invasion. The episode shows other characters becoming annoyed with SpongeBob because he won't stop singing the song. They don't understand that he's not choosing to do this. He's being controlled by something beyond his will. But from their perspective, he's just being annoying and won't stop singing the same tune over and over. This isolation adds to SpongeBob's suffering because no one sympathizes with what he's going through. There's a scene where SpongeBob tries to physically remove the earworm from his brain. This is played for comedy, but it's actually quite dark when you think about it. SpongeBob is so desperate to get the song out that he's willing to try anything, including potentially harmful methods. He's reaching a point where he would rather damage himself than continue living with this song controlling his mind. The episode explores the idea that your mind can be your own prison. SpongeBob can't escape the song because it's inside his head. He can go anywhere, do anything, be with anyone, but the song follows him because it's part of his own thoughts now. There's no physical escape from something that exists entirely in your mind. This is a genuinely frightening concept when you really think about it. Patrick eventually suggests a solution that seems too simple to work. SpongeBob needs to hear a different song that will replace the earworm. They need to fight fire with fire, using another catchy tune to push out musical doodle. SpongeBob is skeptical because nothing else has worked, but he's desperate enough to try anything at this point. Squidward, the one who originally played musical doodle, is brought in to play a different song. The hope is that a new song from Squidward will be catchy enough to replace the earworm. Squidward plays something different, and at first, it seems like it might work. The new song starts competing with musical doodle in SpongeBob's head. There's a battle happening in his mind between two different tunes, but then something worse happens. Instead of replacing the earworm, the new song joins it. Now SpongeBob has two songs stuck in his head, both playing simultaneously. His mental state becomes even more chaotic. The episode shows the inside of his brain with multiple musical worms fighting for space. SpongeBob's mind is completely overrun with these competing melodies. Eventually, through methods the episode doesn't fully explain, SpongeBob manages to get the songs out of his head. The earworms leave his brain, and he's finally free. The relief he feels is visible. He can think his own thoughts again. He has control over his own mind again. The invasion is over, and he's himself again. But the episode ends with a twist. The earworm that left SpongeBob's head finds a new host. Someone else hears musical doodle, and the cycle begins again for them. The song is still out there, waiting to infect another victim. The earworm hasn't been defeated. It's just moved on to someone else. This ending suggests that this kind of mental invasion is always lurking, always ready to take control of the next person who hears the wrong song. What makes Earworm disturbing is how it takes a normal, relatable experience and turns it into something invasive and horrifying. Everyone knows what it's like to get a song stuck in their head, but the episode shows this experience taken to an extreme, where the song actually controls you. You lose your autonomy. Your mind is no longer your own. This amplification of a common experience into a nightmare scenario is effective horror storytelling. The episode also taps into fears about mental illness and losing control of your own thoughts. While the episode frames this as being about an earworm, the experience SpongeBob goes through mirrors what people with obsessive thoughts or intrusive thoughts experience. The inability to stop thinking about something, the way it interrupts your daily life, the feeling of being controlled by your own mind. These are real experiences that people deal with. The visual metaphor of the worm inside SpongeBob's brain is particularly unsettling. Seeing something alive and moving inside his head, making itself comfortable in his mental space, creates a visceral sense of violation. Your brain is supposed to be private, the one place that's entirely yours. Having something invade that space and take it over is a fundamental violation of personal boundaries. The episode's tone is mostly comedic, despite the dark premise. SpongeBob's exaggerated reactions and the silly visual gags keep things from getting too heavy. But underneath the comedy, there's genuine horror in what SpongeBob is experiencing. The episode walks a line between funny and frightening, and depending on how you watch it, it can lean either way. Earworm also reflects anxieties about media and consumption. In a world where we're constantly exposed to songs, advertisements, and content designed to stick in our heads, the episode serves as a metaphor for how media can invade our mental space. We don't always choose what stays in our minds. Sometimes things get in there and we can't get them out, whether we want them there or not. The episode was less controversial than One Course Meal, but it still represented the darker direction SpongeBob was taking during Season 7. The show was exploring more psychological horror concepts, showing characters losing control in various ways. Earworm is one of the more successful attempts at this kind of storytelling, because it balances the horror with humor and doesn't go as far into mean-spirited territory. Looking at Earworm alongside the other disturbing episodes we've discussed shows the range of ways SpongeBob could create unease. The show could do transformation horror, atmospheric horror, psychological abuse, and now, mental invasion. Each episode found different ways to disturb viewers while still technically being a children's cartoon. Earworm specifically explores the horror of losing mental autonomy, of having your own mind turned against you by something you can't control or escape. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Mental invasion showed how something could take over from inside, but SpongeBob could create fear through external forces too. Sometimes the most disturbing episodes came from being captured and controlled by forces beyond your understanding, trapped in situations where escape seemed impossible. Section 7. Shanghaied, trapped with the Flying Dutchman. In March 2001, during Season 2 of SpongeBob SquarePants, the show aired an episode that combined nautical ghost stories with genuine peril in a way that created lasting unease for many viewers. Shanghaied introduces the Flying Dutchman, a ghost pirate who captains a spectral ship, and it places SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward in a situation where they're genuinely trapped, with no clear way to escape. The episode takes the concept of being kidnapped by a supernatural force and plays it surprisingly straight, creating an atmosphere of real danger that persists throughout most of the runtime. The episode begins on what seems like a normal day in Bikini Bottom. SpongeBob wakes up in his pineapple house and starts going through his morning routine. But when he looks out his window, he sees something that shouldn't be there. A massive, ghostly ship is hovering directly above his house, casting a dark shadow over everything. This is the Flying Dutchman's ship, a legendary ghost vessel that appears in the ocean, bringing doom to those who encounter it. SpongeBob is initially excited rather than frightened. He's fascinated by the ghost ship and wants to explore it. He wakes up Patrick, and they decide to sneak aboard the ship to look around. Squidward initially wants nothing to do with this plan, but he gets dragged along anyway. The three of them board the Flying Dutchman's ship, not fully understanding what they're getting themselves into. Once they're on the ship, they start exploring. The ship is designed to look appropriately spooky and supernatural. Everything is green and glowing with ghostly light. The wood looks ancient and rotted. There are cobwebs and mysterious objects scattered everywhere. The ship feels abandoned and haunted, which creates an atmosphere of wrongness from the moment they step aboard. SpongeBob and Patrick are treating this like an adventure, touching things and running around excitedly. Squidward is nervous and wants to leave, but the other two are too distracted to listen to him. They're having fun exploring this ghost ship without considering that there might be actual danger. Their innocence and excitement make what happens next more impactful. The Flying Dutchman himself appears suddenly and dramatically. He's designed to look genuinely intimidating. He's a large ghost with glowing eyes and a scraggly beard. His voice is deep and booming. He wears traditional pirate clothing, but everything about him is transparent and spectral. The show establishes immediately that this is a real ghost with real power, not just someone in a costume or a friendly spirit. The Flying Dutchman is angry that these three have invaded his ship. He appears before them in a burst of ghostly flame, demanding to know why they're trespassing. SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward are now terrified, realizing they've made a terrible mistake. They try to explain that they were just curious and didn't mean any harm, but the Flying Dutchman doesn't care about their excuses. The ghost captain declares that since they've boarded his ship uninvited, they must now serve as his crew for eternity. This is the traditional fate of those who are Shanghaied, which is where the episode gets its title. To be Shanghaied means to be kidnapped and forced to work on a ship against your will. The Flying Dutchman is invoking this old nautical tradition, claiming SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward as his eternal slaves. This is where the episode becomes genuinely disturbing. The three characters are now prisoners on a ghost ship with no apparent way to escape. The Flying Dutchman has supernatural powers that make resistance impossible. He can make them do whatever he wants. They're trapped in a situation where their free will has been completely taken away. The episode lingers on this helplessness in ways that create real anxiety. The Flying Dutchman puts them to work, doing various tasks around the ship. He makes them scrub the deck, polish the brass, and perform other menial labor. But he does this in supernatural ways that make the work impossible. He'll make them clean something and then immediately make it dirty again. He'll give them tasks that can't be completed. The work isn't just hard, it's designed to be eternal and futile. SpongeBob tries to stay optimistic and treat this like a normal job, but even he starts to crack under the pressure. Patrick is confused and scared. Squidward is miserable and angry, blaming SpongeBob and Patrick for getting them into this situation. The episode shows their spirits breaking as they realize they might actually be trapped here forever. The Flying Dutchman seems to enjoy their suffering. He laughs at their attempts to complete impossible tasks. He mocks them when they fail. He makes it clear that he has all the power and they have none. This dynamic creates a feeling of helplessness that's unusual for SpongeBob. Usually the characters can find some way out of bad situations, but here they're completely at the mercy of a being far more powerful than them. There's a scene where Squidward tries to reason with the Flying Dutchman, explaining that they're not sailors and don't belong on his ship. The Flying Dutchman's response is to laugh and say that their protests don't matter. They're his crew now, and that's the end of it. The casual dismissal of their agency is chilling in its own way. Their wants and needs are completely irrelevant to this ghost. The episode also shows the Flying Dutchman using his supernatural powers in ways that emphasize how outmatched the characters are. He can fly through walls. He can make objects appear and disappear. He can change his size and shape. He's essentially omnipotent within his ship. This makes escape seem truly impossible. How do you run away from someone who can teleport and walk through walls? At one point, SpongeBob suggests they try to earn their freedom by doing a really good job with their work. Maybe if they prove themselves valuable and competent, the Flying Dutchman will let them go. But this hope is quickly crushed when the ghost makes it clear that he has no intention of ever releasing them. Their servitude is meant to be eternal, regardless of how well they perform their duties. The episode explores what it would be like to be trapped forever with no hope of freedom. The characters start to despair as the reality of their situation sinks in. They'll never see their homes again. They'll never see their friends or family. They'll spend the rest of time scrubbing a ghost ship for a cruel master. The episode doesn't shy away from showing how psychologically damaging this would be. Eventually, through a series of events involving SpongeBob's annoying behavior wearing down the Flying Dutchman's patience, the ghost offers them a deal. He's so tired of SpongeBob's constant cheerfulness and chattering that he's willing to grant them one wish if they'll just be quiet. This is their chance at freedom, but they only get one wish, and they have to agree on what to wish for. This creates a new source of tension. SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward each have different ideas about what they should wish for. They start arguing about whose wish is most important. Should they wish to go home? Should they wish for something else? They can't agree, and their arguing wastes precious time. The Flying Dutchman is getting impatient and threatens to revoke his offer if they don't decide soon. The arguments between the three characters feel real and frustrating. They're in a life or death situation and they can't work together. Each one thinks their wish is the most important. Squidward wants to wish for the Flying Dutchman to be turned into a vegetarian so he can't eat them. SpongeBob wants to wish for something else. Patrick wants something different. Their inability to cooperate puts their one chance at freedom at risk. Finally, Squidward makes a wish without consulting the others. He wishes that he had never met SpongeBob and Patrick. This is a selfish wish that doesn't save all of them, just Squidward himself. The wish is granted, and Squidward disappears from the ship, leaving SpongeBob and Patrick still trapped. This betrayal adds another layer to the episode's disturbing nature. One of them abandoned the others to save himself, but the wish has unexpected consequences. Without ever having met SpongeBob and Patrick, Squidward's life back in Bikini Bottom is different. The episode shows an alternate timeline where Squidward lives alone without his annoying neighbors. At first, this seems like paradise to him, but then he realizes that his life is empty without them. He actually misses SpongeBob and Patrick, even though they drove him crazy. Meanwhile, SpongeBob and Patrick are still on the Flying Dutchman's ship, now without Squidward. They're still trapped and still facing eternal servitude. The episode has split the group up, making their situation even more hopeless. They've lost one of their companions, and they're no closer to freedom than they were before. The episode actually filmed 3 different endings, and different versions aired in different markets. In one ending, SpongeBob wishes for the Flying Dutchman to be a vegetarian. In another, he wishes that they were never born. In the third, he wishes for candy. Each ending was meant to be absurd in its own way, showing that even when they get their wish, the result is unexpected or problematic. What makes Shanghaied disturbing is the extended period where the characters are genuinely trapped with no way out. Most SpongeBob episodes resolve conflicts relatively quickly, but this episode spends most of its runtime with the characters in a hopeless situation. They're prisoners of a supernatural being who has complete power over them. This powerlessness creates real dread. The Flying Dutchman himself is designed and performed to be actually threatening rather than just silly. His voice actor, Brian Doyle Murray, gives him a menacing quality. He sounds like someone who has been a ghost pirate for centuries and has lost any sympathy for the living. He's not cruel in a cartoonish villain way. He's cruel in a casual, matter-of-fact way that's more unsettling. The episode also plays with the fear of being taken away from everything you know and forced into a new life against your will. SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward are ripped away from their normal lives and told they'll never return. This is a primal fear that resonates with viewers of all ages. The idea that you could be somewhere familiar one moment and then kidnapped and enslaved the next is genuinely frightening. The ghost ship setting contributes to the unsettling atmosphere throughout the episode. The ship feels isolated and cut off from the normal world. Once you're on the Flying Dutchman's ship, you're in his domain, where his rules apply. The normal physics and logic of Bikini Bottom don't work here. This otherworldly quality makes the ship feel like a trap that's impossible to escape from. The episode references traditional ghost stories and nautical legends, giving it a connection to real folklore. The Flying Dutchman is based on actual legends about ghost ships and doomed sailors. By tapping into these existing stories, the episode gains a layer of cultural fear that audiences already bring with them. Even young viewers who don't know the legends can sense that this is drawing from something older and darker. Looking at Shanghaied in the context of SpongeBob's first few seasons shows how the show was experimenting with different kinds of storytelling. This episode is darker and more sustained in its peril than most episodes from this era. It proved that SpongeBob could do extended supernatural horror scenarios while still being entertaining and eventually resolving things in a satisfying way. The episode has remained popular with fans, partly because of its darker tone, and partly because the Flying Dutchman became a recurring character. He would appear in later episodes, usually in contexts where he was scary, but ultimately not as threatening as he is in this first appearance. Shanghaied represents the Flying Dutchman at his most dangerous and powerful. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Being trapped on a ghost ship showed one kind of captivity, but SpongeBob explored other ways characters could be imprisoned by circumstances beyond their control. Sometimes the prison wasn't supernatural at all, but came from the very real consequences of accidents and misunderstandings. Section 8. Doing Time. The Nightmare of Incarceration. In February 2001, during Season 2 of SpongeBob SquarePants, the show aired an episode that dealt with incarceration and imprisonment in ways that were surprisingly bleak for a children's cartoon. Doing Time shows what happens when Mrs. Puff, SpongeBob's boating school teacher, gets sent to prison for a crime she didn't really commit. The episode explores the psychological toll of being locked away, the injustice of the legal system, and the claustrophobic horror of being trapped in a cell with no control over your own life. The episode begins with SpongeBob taking yet another boating test with Mrs. Puff. SpongeBob has failed his boating test many times before. He's Mrs. Puff's most difficult student, someone who, despite his enthusiasm and dedication, simply cannot drive a boat safely. Mrs. Puff has spent countless hours trying to teach him, and every test ends in disaster. This particular test will be no different. SpongeBob gets into the boat with Mrs. Puff beside him as his instructor. From the moment he starts driving, things go wrong. He's driving erratically, swerving all over the road, going too fast and then too slow. Mrs. Puff is terrified, gripping her seat and trying to give him instructions, but SpongeBob isn't listening or can't follow her directions properly. The boat careens through Bikini Bottom, causing chaos wherever it goes. The boat crashes through buildings, smashes into property, and creates destruction throughout the city. SpongeBob is completely oblivious to the damage he's causing. He thinks he's doing well, and keeps chattering happily about how great he's doing on his test. Mrs. Puff can see the destruction around them and knows this is going to end badly. She's experienced this nightmare many times before, but it never gets easier. Finally, the boat crashes one final time and comes to a stop. SpongeBob is still happy, thinking he did well. Mrs. Puff is traumatized and shaking. But then the police arrive. They see all the damage that's been caused, and they need someone to hold responsible. As the driving instructor in the boat, Mrs. Puff is the one who gets blamed for the destruction. The police arrest Mrs. Puff on the spot. She tries to explain that she was just the instructor, that SpongeBob was the one driving, that this wasn't her fault. But the authorities don't listen to her protests. In their eyes, she was the adult supervisor in the vehicle, and therefore she's responsible for what happened. She's handcuffed and taken away while SpongeBob watches in confusion. Mrs. Puff is brought to trial, and the trial is quick and perfunctory. She doesn't get a chance to properly defend herself. The evidence of the destruction is presented, and the judge finds her guilty. She's sentenced to prison. The whole process happens so fast that Mrs. Puff doesn't have time to process what's happening to her. One moment she's a respected teacher, the next she's being sent to prison. The episode shows Mrs. Puff being transported to prison in a police vehicle. She's in the back seat, still wearing handcuffs, watching Bikini Bottom pass by through the window. She realizes she's losing her freedom, her job, her normal life. Everything is being taken away from her because of someone else's actions. The injustice of the situation is clear, but there's nothing she can do about it. When Mrs. Puff arrives at the prison, the episode takes on an even darker tone. The prison is designed to look grim and oppressive. The walls are gray concrete. The lighting is harsh and fluorescent. Everything is cold and institutional. This is a place designed to break spirits and punish people. Mrs. Puff is processed into the system, given prison clothes, and assigned to a cell. The cell Mrs. Puff is placed in is small and claustrophobic. It has bare concrete walls, a hard bed, and bars on the window. There's no privacy, no comfort, no personal space. Mrs. Puff sits on the bed and starts to comprehend the reality of her situation. She's going to be locked in this tiny room for an extended period of time, separated from everything she knows and cares about. The episode doesn't shy away from showing the psychological impact of incarceration on Mrs. Puff. She becomes depressed and hopeless. The cheerful, professional teacher we know is replaced by someone who's been broken by the system. She sits in her cell staring at the walls, trying to cope with the loss of her freedom. The show depicts genuine despair in ways that feel too real for a cartoon. Mrs. Puff's fellow prisoners are shown as tough and intimidating. They're designed to look like hardened criminals who have been in prison for a long time. They view Mrs. Puff as weak and an easy target. The episode suggests that prison isn't just about being locked up. It's about being surrounded by dangerous people in an environment where you're always under threat. Mrs. Puff is afraid of her fellow inmates and has to constantly watch her back. There's a scene in the prison cafeteria where Mrs. Puff is trying to eat her meal. The other prisoners are staring at her, making her uncomfortable. One particularly large and intimidating prisoner approaches her table. Mrs. Puff is terrified, thinking she's about to be attacked or robbed. The tension in this scene is played completely straight. The show wants you to feel Mrs. Puff's fear and vulnerability. The episode also shows the dehumanizing aspects of prison life. Mrs. Puff has to follow strict schedules. She's told when to eat, when to sleep, when to exercise. She has no control over her own time or her own choices. Guards order her around and treat her like a number rather than a person. The loss of autonomy is shown to be almost as painful as the loss of freedom itself. Meanwhile, outside the prison, SpongeBob feels guilty about what happened. He knows that Mrs. Puff is in prison because of his driving. He wants to help her, but doesn't know how. Patrick suggests that they should break Mrs. Puff out of prison, and SpongeBob agrees to this plan. They're going to attempt a prison break to free their friend. SpongeBob and Patrick's prison break attempt provides some comic relief in an otherwise dark episode, but it also highlights how serious Mrs. Puff's situation is. The fact that SpongeBob feels he needs to break her out of prison shows that he understands she doesn't deserve to be there. The prison break subplot acknowledges that Mrs. Puff is a victim of injustice. Inside the prison, Mrs. Puff starts to change. The harsh environment and constant stress begin to affect her personality. She becomes harder and more cynical. The sweet teacher is being replaced by someone who's learned to survive in prison. This transformation is disturbing because it shows how institutions can change people, how being treated like a criminal can make you act like one. There's a dream sequence where Mrs. Puff imagines what her life could be like if she wasn't in prison. She dreams of being free, of teaching her class, of living her normal life. But then she wakes up and she's still in her cell. The contrast between the dream and reality makes her situation feel even more oppressive. She has hope for a moment, and then it's taken away, which is its own kind of cruelty. SpongeBob and Patrick manage to infiltrate the prison in a scene that's played for comedy, but has dark undertones. They navigate through the prison, trying to find Mrs. Puff's cell. The prison is shown as a maze of corridors and locked doors. Even as visitors with a plan, SpongeBob and Patrick struggle to navigate this place. The architecture of the prison is designed to trap and confuse. When they finally find Mrs. Puff, she's initially happy to see them, but then horrified that they've broken into a prison. She knows that their presence here will only make things worse. If they're caught, they'll be arrested too. And if she's caught with them, her sentence will be extended. Their attempt to help might actually hurt her more. The prison break attempt inevitably goes wrong. Alarms start blaring. Guards come running. SpongeBob, Patrick, and Mrs. Puff are trying to escape, but the prison is designed to prevent exactly this. They run through corridors, but every path seems to lead to a dead end or another locked door. The prison itself is a trap that's nearly impossible to escape from. Mrs. Puff realizes that she can't escape. Even if they could get out of the building, she would be a fugitive for the rest of her life. She would always be running and hiding. That's not freedom, it's just a different kind of prison. She makes the decision to stay and serve her sentence, rather than become a fugitive. But then, through a series of events that the episode doesn't fully explain in realistic terms, Mrs. Puff's sentence is suddenly commuted and she's released. The legal system that put her in prison now lets her out, just as arbitrarily as it locked her up. She's free to go back to her normal life. She returns to her job teaching at boating school, and everything goes back to normal. Except things aren't really normal. Mrs. Puff has been traumatized by her experience in prison. She's more nervous and jumpy than she was before. When she sees SpongeBob in her class again, she has a moment of panic, remembering that he's the reason she went to prison in the first place. The episode ends with the implication that this cycle will continue, that SpongeBob will fail another test and cause more destruction, and Mrs. Puff might end up in prison again. What makes Doing Time disturbing is how seriously it treats incarceration. The episode doesn't make prison seem fun or silly. It shows it as a genuinely awful experience that damages people psychologically. Mrs. Puff's time in prison breaks something in her. She's not the same person when she comes out. The show depicts imprisonment as a form of trauma. The episode also highlights the injustice of Mrs. Puff's situation. She didn't drive the boat. She was trying to teach someone who refused to learn properly. Yet she's the one who gets punished, while SpongeBob faces no consequences. This speaks to larger themes about how punishment often falls on the wrong people, how the justice system can be arbitrary and unfair. The claustrophobic feeling of Mrs. Puff's prison cell is emphasized through the animation. The cell is drawn to feel small and confining. The camera angles make it seem like the walls are closing in. The bars on the window are prominent in every shot, constantly reminding viewers that Mrs. Puff is caged. The visual language of the episode reinforces the psychological horror of imprisonment. The other prisoners in the episode are designed to be intimidating in ways that feel more realistic than cartoon villains usually do. They're not over-the-top evil. They're just hard and mean in the way that people who've been incarcerated for a long time often become. They represent the danger of being locked up with people who have nothing to lose. The episode also touches on the dehumanizing aspects of the prison system through small details. Mrs. Puff is given a number. She has to wear a uniform. She's processed like an object rather than a person. These details add up to create a picture of how institutions strip away individuality and dignity from the people they're meant to contain. Looking at Doing Time in the context of children's entertainment raises questions about what's appropriate to show young viewers. The episode depicts imprisonment in realistic and disturbing ways. It shows the psychological damage that incarceration causes. This is heavy material for a show aimed at children, but it's also educational in a way. The episode doesn't glamorize prison or make it seem like an adventure. It shows it as something to be afraid of. The fact that Mrs. Puff is an innocent person makes her imprisonment even more disturbing. She's not a criminal who chose to break the law. She's a teacher who was in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong student. Her imprisonment represents how anyone can end up trapped in a system they don't deserve to be in. How bad things can happen to good people through no fault of their own. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Prison showed one kind of institutional control, but SpongeBob found other ways to trap characters in situations they couldn't escape. Sometimes the most disturbing episodes were the ones where isolation itself became the enemy, where being cut off from help and surrounded by strangeness created a special kind of nightmare. Section 9. I Had an Accident. The Horror of Self-Imposed Isolation. In October 2003, during Season 3 of SpongeBob SquarePants, the show aired an episode that explored a different kind of disturbing scenario. What happens when fear causes someone to completely withdraw from life? I Had an Accident deals with SpongeBob choosing to lock himself inside his house and never come out again after experiencing a traumatic injury. The episode shows the psychological breakdown that leads someone to give up on the outside world, and it depicts the slow decay of someone who chooses isolation over facing their fears. What makes this episode particularly unsettling is how it portrays SpongeBob's descent into agoraphobia and the existential dread that comes with deciding that life outside is too dangerous to risk. The episode begins with SpongeBob, Patrick, and Sandy doing what they love to do, playing outside and having fun. Specifically, they're sandboarding, which is the underwater equivalent of snowboarding or skateboarding. They're sliding down sand dunes, doing tricks, and enjoying themselves. SpongeBob is happy and carefree, fully engaged with life and his friends. Everything seems normal and fun. There's no indication that anything is about to go wrong. But then SpongeBob attempts a particularly ambitious trick. He wants to do something impressive to show off for his friends. He goes up to the top of a very high sand dune and prepares to slide down at high speed. Patrick and Sandy are watching, excited to see what he's going to do. SpongeBob launches himself down the dune, but he loses control. He's going too fast and can't steer properly. The sandboard wobbles beneath him. What happens next is shown in graphic detail that's unusual for SpongeBob. The show actually depicts SpongeBob having a serious accident. He crashes hard, and the impact is severe enough that his body breaks apart. His bottom half separates from his top half. The show literally shows SpongeBob split in two from the force of the crash. This is body horror played for comedy, but the imagery is still disturbing because it shows a character we care about being seriously injured. SpongeBob's friends rush to help him. They put him back together because in the cartoon logic of SpongeBob's world, being torn in half isn't necessarily permanent. They take him to the doctor, and the doctor treats his injuries. SpongeBob will physically recover from this accident. His body will heal, but something has changed inside SpongeBob's mind. The accident has traumatized him in a way that goes beyond physical injury. When SpongeBob returns home from the doctor, he makes a decision that will define the rest of the episode. He decides that the outside world is too dangerous. If he goes outside, he might get hurt again. He might have another accident, or something even worse could happen. The only way to be truly safe is to never leave his house again. He announces this decision to Patrick and Sandy, who are shocked and confused by his extreme reaction. SpongeBob boards up his windows and locks his doors. He's creating a fortress, sealing himself inside his pineapple house where nothing can hurt him. Patrick and Sandy try to reason with him, explaining that accidents happen, but you can't let fear control your life. They tell him that staying inside forever isn't living. But SpongeBob is adamant. He's made his choice, and nothing they say will change his mind. He's going to stay inside where it's safe. The episode then shows what SpongeBob's life becomes when he refuses to leave his house. At first, he tries to act like everything is normal. He has his furniture and his belongings. He can watch TV and occupy himself with indoor activities. He tells himself that he doesn't need to go outside to be happy. He can have a perfectly good life right here in his living room. But as time passes, the reality of his choice becomes clear. SpongeBob starts talking to inanimate objects because he has no one else to interact with. He has conversations with his furniture, treating chairs and lamps like they're his friends. He's creating imaginary social interactions to fill the void left by his real friends who are outside living their lives. The show depicts this as sad and pathetic rather than funny. SpongeBob is clearly losing his grip on reality. Patrick and Sandy come to visit SpongeBob multiple times, trying to convince him to come outside. They tell him about all the fun things they're doing, trying to tempt him out of his self-imposed prison. They describe beautiful days, exciting adventures, and all the experiences he's missing. But SpongeBob refuses every time. He's developed a deep-seated fear that makes the outside world seem terrifying, no matter what they say. There's a scene where Patrick and Sandy are outside SpongeBob's window, and they can see him through the glass. They're trying to show him that outside is safe and fun. But SpongeBob just stares at them from inside his house, separated by the window. The glass barrier between them becomes a symbol of how SpongeBob has cut himself off from life. He can see the world, but he won't participate in it. The isolation starts to affect SpongeBob's mental state in visible ways. He becomes more anxious and paranoid. Every sound makes him jump. He's constantly worried that something dangerous might break into his house. The safety he thought he would find by staying inside has turned into a different kind of fear. Now he's afraid of threats that don't even exist, trapped in a cycle of anxiety that feeds on itself. SpongeBob also starts to physically deteriorate from his isolation. The show depicts him becoming paler and weaker. He's not getting sunlight or fresh air or exercise. His body is suffering from being confined to a small space with no activity. The animation shows him looking sickly and unhealthy. The isolation isn't just harming his mind, it's harming his body too. There's a particularly sad moment where SpongeBob looks at a calendar and realizes how much time has passed since his accident. Days have turned into weeks. He's been locked inside for so long that he's losing track of time. The episode doesn't specify exactly how long SpongeBob has been isolated, but it's long enough that his friends are getting desperate to reach him. Patrick and Sandy decide they need to do something more dramatic to snap SpongeBob out of his isolation. They come up with a plan to show him what he's missing by staging an elaborate scene outside his window. They want to demonstrate that life outside is worth the risk. They perform and play, trying to make outside look so appealing that SpongeBob will overcome his fear. But SpongeBob watches from his window and still refuses to come out. He acknowledges that it looks fun. He admits that he misses his friends and misses being outside. But his fear is too strong. He's built a mental prison around himself that's more powerful than any physical barrier. Even seeing his friends having fun right in front of him isn't enough to make him brave enough to open his door. The episode takes an unexpected turn when SpongeBob realizes that one of the figures outside isn't actually his friend. A gorilla appears in the scene outside, which doesn't make sense because gorillas don't live underwater. This surreal element breaks SpongeBob's resolve because it's so unexpected and strange that he has to investigate. His curiosity overcomes his fear, at least temporarily. SpongeBob opens his door for the first time in weeks to question why there's a gorilla outside his house. The moment he steps outside, the gorilla attacks him. The very thing SpongeBob was afraid of, getting hurt outside, happens immediately. The gorilla beats him up in a cartoonish but still violent sequence. SpongeBob's worst fears are confirmed. Going outside was dangerous, and he got hurt because of it. But here's where the episode does something interesting with its message. After being attacked by the gorilla, SpongeBob doesn't retreat back into his house. Instead, he seems to accept that bad things can happen anywhere. The gorilla throws him back into his house, showing that being inside doesn't actually guarantee safety either. If a gorilla can attack you outside, then anything can happen inside too. There's no such thing as complete safety. The episode ends with a bizarre sequence where the gorilla reveals he's actually just a costume worn by a man, and then a family of live-action gorillas appears, and the whole thing becomes completely surreal and nonsensical. This absurd ending seems designed to break the tension of the episode and remind viewers that this is a cartoon where logic doesn't always apply. But the emotional journey SpongeBob went through was real, even if the resolution was silly. What makes I Had an Accident disturbing is how accurately it depicts the psychology of someone developing agoraphobia and severe anxiety. SpongeBob's progression from having an accident to becoming completely isolated follows a realistic pattern. The accident creates fear. The fear leads to avoidance. The avoidance becomes a habit. The habit turns into a prison. This is how phobias actually develop and how they trap people in cycles of fear. The episode shows the existential horror of choosing to stop living your life. SpongeBob is alive, but he's not really living. He's existing in a small space, talking to furniture, watching life happen outside his window. He's given up on experiences, on friendship, on joy, all because he's afraid of being hurt. The episode depicts what depression and anxiety can do to a person, how fear can make you retreat from the world until you're barely participating in your own life. The visual of SpongeBob staring out his window at his friends is particularly powerful. He can see them having fun. He wants to join them. But there's an invisible barrier created by his own fear that he can't cross. The window becomes a metaphor for how mental illness can trap you, letting you see what you're missing, but preventing you from reaching it. The episode also touches on how isolation changes a person. SpongeBob starts out as the most social, friendly character in the show, but isolation turns him into someone paranoid and withdrawn. The show demonstrates how humans, and even cartoon sponges, are social creatures who need interaction and connection to maintain their mental health. Cut off from others, SpongeBob begins to deteriorate. The fact that SpongeBob's friends keep trying to reach him shows the frustration of watching someone you care about destroy themselves through fear. Patrick and Sandy can see that SpongeBob is hurting himself with his isolation. They can see that his fear is irrational, but they can't force him to change. They can only keep trying to reach him and hope that eventually he'll find the courage to step outside. The episode's treatment of the accident itself is notable. The show doesn't minimize the injury. SpongeBob literally breaks in half, which is a serious injury even in cartoon terms. The episode acknowledges that the accident was traumatic and that SpongeBob's fear comes from a real experience of pain. The show doesn't say SpongeBob is wrong to be afraid. It says he's wrong to let that fear consume his entire life. Looking at I Had an Accident through an adult lens reveals layers that children might not fully grasp. Kids might see it as an episode where SpongeBob acts silly and scared. Adults can recognize it as a surprisingly accurate portrayal of how trauma can lead to isolation, how fear can become paralyzing, and how mental health struggles can trap someone in their own home. The episode aired during Season 3, which is considered part of SpongeBob's golden age. This shows that even during the show's best period, when it was consistently funny and creative, it was willing to tackle darker psychological themes. The show had confidence that it could explore serious emotional territory while still being entertaining. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Self-imposed isolation showed one kind of prison, but the show would explore other ways characters could be trapped by their own minds and circumstances. Sometimes the most disturbing episodes were the ones where the comedy itself became uncomfortable, where the line between funny and cruel became impossible to distinguish. Section 10. Other episodes with creepy undertones. Beyond the episodes we've already examined in detail, SpongeBob SquarePants contains numerous other moments that create unease through subtler means. These episodes might not be outright horror like Graveyard Shift, or feature disturbing transformations like I Was a Teenage Gary, but they contain elements that many viewers find unsettling in ways that linger after watching. Understanding these episodes helps us see the full range of how SpongeBob could create discomfort, not just through obvious scares, but through mood, atmosphere, and unexpected tonal shifts that caught viewers off guard. Spongehenge from Season 5 presents one of the strangest and most unsettling scenarios in the entire series. The episode begins normally enough. with SpongeBob going about his day at the Krusty Krab. But jellyfish keep swarming around him because they're attracted to the musical sounds his pores make when wind blows through them. This constant harassment by jellyfish becomes so overwhelming that SpongeBob can't function normally. He can't work, he can't sleep, and he can't escape the endless swarm of jellyfish that follow him everywhere. SpongeBob's solution is to hide in a cave and create stone replicas of himself that will attract the jellyfish instead. He spends what appears to be an enormous amount of time carving these stone SpongeBobs, and the episode shows this process in montage sequences that feel uncomfortably long. We watch SpongeBob alone in a cave, obsessively creating statue after statue, with no other characters appearing to check on him or help him. The isolation is profound, and the obsessive behavior feels disturbing rather than funny. The episode takes its darkest turn at the end, which jumps forward in time thousands of years into the future. The stone SpongeBobs that the real SpongeBob created have become ancient monuments, similar to Easter Island's Moai statues or Stonehenge. Alien visitors discover these stone monuments and wonder about their purpose and meaning. The implication is clear. SpongeBob never left that cave. He spent the rest of his life there, alone, creating statues to protect himself from jellyfish. Everyone he knew is long dead. Bikini Bottom itself appears to be abandoned or destroyed. This ending is profoundly bleak for a children's cartoon. The episode doesn't explicitly state that SpongeBob died alone in that cave, but it strongly suggests that outcome. The cheerful protagonist of the show is shown having spent potentially years in isolation, engaging in obsessive behavior, and ultimately being forgotten by time until only his stone monuments remain. The episode never returns to show SpongeBob escaping or reuniting with his friends. The story just ends with the implication that everything SpongeBob knew is gone. What makes SpongeHenge particularly unsettling is how it uses time as a source of horror. The episode demonstrates that enough time passing can erase everything. All of SpongeBob's friendships, his job, his home, the entire town of Bikini Bottom. All of it becomes ancient history that future civilizations can only speculate about. This touches on existential fears about mortality and meaninglessness that are heavy themes for any show, let alone one about a talking sponge. Are You Happy Now from Season 8 deals with even darker psychological territory. The episode centers on Squidward experiencing what appears to be clinical depression. He wakes up one morning and realizes he can't remember his happiest memory. This sends him spiraling into an attempt to create a new happy memory, but nothing he tries works. Every activity he engages in fails to make him happy, and his mood deteriorates throughout the episode. The episode depicts Squidward's depression with uncomfortable accuracy. He lies in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to find motivation to get up. He sits in his house in darkness, too apathetic to turn on lights. He goes through the motions of daily activities without experiencing any joy or satisfaction. These are realistic symptoms of depression, shown in a cartoon format that makes them more accessible but no less serious. SpongeBob tries to help Squidward by suggesting various activities that might make him happy. They go to the park, they try hobbies, they attempt different experiences. Nothing works. Squidward remains miserable and disconnected from everything around him. The episode shows depression as something that can't be fixed with simple solutions or good intentions, which is a mature and honest portrayal that many adult viewers recognize from their own experiences. The episode's most disturbing sequence shows Squidward alone in his house, surrounded by darkness, having what appears to be a complete breakdown. He's talking to himself, questioning his entire existence, and showing signs of genuine mental health crisis. For a children's show to depict this level of psychological distress is remarkable and unsettling. The episode treats Squidward's suffering as real rather than as a setup for jokes. The resolution involves Squidward finally remembering a happy memory from his past, which temporarily lifts his mood. But the episode doesn't suggest that his depression is cured or that everything is fine now. It simply shows one moment of relief in what has been an extended period of suffering. This honest approach to depicting mental health struggles makes the episode resonate with viewers who have experienced similar feelings. But it also makes the episode darker than most SpongeBob content. The Splinter from Season 6 creates discomfort through body horror presented in graphic detail. The episode shows SpongeBob getting a splinter in his thumb while working at the Krusty Krab. What starts as a minor injury becomes increasingly grotesque as the splinter becomes infected. The show depicts the infection with disturbing realism, showing the area around the splinter becoming swollen, discolored, and filled with pus. The episode lingers on these grotesque visuals in ways that feel excessive and uncomfortable. Close-up shots show the infected area in detail, with colors and textures that look genuinely disgusting rather than cartoonishly silly. The episode wants viewers to feel revulsion at what they're seeing, and it succeeds perhaps too well. Many viewers remember being genuinely nauseated by the imagery in this episode. SpongeBob's attempts to hide the splinter from Mr. Krabs only make things worse. He covers it with various methods that all fail, and each failure results in more grotesque visuals of the infected wound. The episode builds to a climax where the splinter is finally removed in the most painful and disturbing way possible. The focus on physical injury and bodily grossness makes this episode uncomfortable viewing for many people. Squid's Visit from Season 7 creates unease through SpongeBob's increasingly obsessive and controlling behavior. The episode shows SpongeBob desperately wanting Squidward to visit his house. When Squidward finally does visit, SpongeBob reveals that he's completely redecorated one room to look exactly like Squidward's house. He's recreated every detail of Squidward's living space in his own home. This revelation is genuinely creepy when you think about the implications. SpongeBob has been so obsessed with Squidward that he memorized every detail of his neighbor's house and recreated it perfectly. The episode plays this as innocent enthusiasm, but the behavior crosses into stalking territory. SpongeBob then locks Squidward inside and won't let him leave, which turns the situation into actual kidnapping. The episode treats these actions as harmless quirks, rather than as serious violations of Squidward's autonomy and privacy. This disconnect between how the episode presents SpongeBob's behavior and what that behavior actually represents creates discomfort for viewers who recognize the darker implications. SpongeBob's obsessive recreation of Squidward's house and his refusal to let Squidward leave are not cute or funny when examined seriously. Fungus Among Us from Season 5 deals with disease and contagion in ways that feel unsettling. The episode shows SpongeBob developing a mysterious fungal growth on his body that starts spreading to other characters. The fungus is depicted as gross and infectious, and the episode shows it covering more and more of SpongeBob's body as time passes. The theme of being infected with something you can't control and that makes others avoid you touches on real fears about disease and contamination. The episode shows how SpongeBob's friends and coworkers start treating him differently once he's infected, avoiding him and showing disgust. This social isolation because of illness creates genuine sadness alongside the gross-out humor. The episode also shows health authorities attempting to quarantine SpongeBob, treating him like a biohazard rather than a person. The dehumanization that comes with being seen as diseased or contaminated is portrayed clearly enough that it creates discomfort. While the episode is ultimately played for comedy, the underlying themes of illness, contagion, and social rejection are darker than typical SpongeBob content. A Pal for Gary from Season 7 is disturbing because of how it portrays SpongeBob's treatment of his pet. The episode shows SpongeBob getting a second pet to keep Gary company, but this new pet is actually a dangerous creature that attacks Gary repeatedly. SpongeBob refuses to believe Gary when Gary tries to communicate that he's being hurt. Every time Gary is attacked, SpongeBob blames Gary for being mean to the new pet. The episode essentially shows SpongeBob gaslighting his pet and allowing Gary to be harmed because SpongeBob refuses to see what's actually happening. This is deeply uncomfortable because SpongeBob is usually portrayed as kind and caring, especially toward Gary. Seeing him be willfully ignorant of his pet's suffering creates cognitive dissonance that many viewers find disturbing. Choir Boys from Season 9 shows Squidward experiencing a series of injuries and accidents that prevent him from attending a choir audition he's been looking forward to. The episode takes glee in showing Squidward getting hurt repeatedly, with each injury preventing him from achieving something he desperately wants. The humor comes entirely from watching a character suffer, with no balance or moment of victory to make the suffering feel worthwhile. What makes episodes like Choir Boys and similar Squidward torture episodes unsettling is how they represent a shift in the show's comedy. Early SpongeBob would show Squidward suffering, but would also occasionally let him have moments of triumph or satisfaction. Later episodes removed those moments entirely, making Squidward exist solely to be miserable. This creates a mean-spirited tone that feels uncomfortable even when the individual jokes might be technically well executed. Face Freeze from Season 9 shows SpongeBob and Patrick making ugly faces at each other until their faces get stuck in those positions permanently. The episode features extended sequences of increasingly grotesque facial expressions, with the animation becoming more detailed and disturbing as the faces become more distorted. The episode pushes the limits of how ugly and wrong the characters can look while still being recognizable. The permanence of the transformation is what makes this episode particularly unsettling. SpongeBob and Patrick are stuck with these horrifying faces forever, unable to return to normal. They have to live their lives with grotesquely distorted features that make them look like monsters. The episode plays this for comedy, but the underlying premise of being permanently disfigured is darker than the show seems to recognize. Ink Lemonade from Season 11 contains a scene where Patrick tortures and terrifies his pet worm in order to harvest the ink it produces when scared. Patrick deliberately creates situations that cause his pet extreme fear and distress, all so he can collect the ink to make lemonade. The episode shows animal abuse presented as acceptable behavior, which many viewers found deeply disturbing and inappropriate. These episodes create unease through different methods than the obvious horror episodes we examined earlier. They use uncomfortable premises, unexpectedly dark endings, grotesque visuals, mean-spirited humor, or realistic depictions of psychological struggles. They show that SpongeBob could be disturbing even without traditional horror elements like ghosts or transformation sequences. Sometimes the most unsettling content came from seeing familiar characters behave in ways that felt wrong, or from seeing the show take its comedy into territory that stopped feeling funny and started feeling cruel. The common thread through all these episodes is that they violate expectations in ways that create lasting discomfort. When you watch SpongeBob, you expect certain things. You expect the show to be fundamentally kind, even when characters are mean to each other. You expect endings that provide resolution. You expect that suffering will be temporary and balanced with moments of joy. These episodes break those expectations by being meaner, darker, or more grotesque than the show's usual standards. And that violation is what makes them stick in viewers' memories. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But understanding which episodes contain disturbing elements is only part of the picture. We also need to examine why these moments work so effectively, and what makes SpongeBob's approach to unsettling content different from other shows. Section 11. What makes SpongeBob's strange moments effective? The disturbing and unsettling elements in SpongeBob SquarePants work so effectively because they exist within a show that has established itself as fundamentally cheerful and safe. This contrast between expectation and reality is what gives these moments their power. When a show that's supposed to comfort you suddenly makes you uncomfortable, that discomfort hits harder than it would in a show where you already expected to be scared. Understanding why SpongeBob's strange moments are so effective requires examining how the show uses contrast, how it employs psychological horror techniques, and how it takes advantage of the unique possibilities that animation provides. The most important factor in making SpongeBob's disturbing moments effective is the baseline the show establishes. SpongeBob SquarePants presents itself as a bright, cheerful show about a happy character living an optimistic life. The color palette is dominated by yellows, blues, and other vibrant colors. The music is upbeat and bouncy. The main character is literally designed to look friendly and approachable, with big eyes and a huge smile. The show's opening theme song is one of the most cheerful and memorable in television, immediately putting viewers in a positive mood. This established baseline creates expectations. When you turn on SpongeBob, you know what you're going to get. You expect silliness, you expect bright colors, you expect that any problems will be resolved happily. The show trains you to feel safe and comfortable in Bikini Bottom. You know this world and you trust it. This trust is crucial because it's what makes the violations of that trust so impactful. When an episode like Rock Bottom suddenly drops SpongeBob into an environment that's dark, hostile, and completely unlike the cheerful Bikini Bottom we know, the contrast is jarring. Everything that made the show feel safe is stripped away. The colors are wrong, the music is wrong, the characters speak in ways we can't understand, and the usual rules don't apply. This violation of the established baseline creates immediate unease because viewers recognize that something fundamental has changed. The same principle applies to tonal shifts within episodes. Nasty Patty starts as a normal episode about the Krusty Krab and a health inspector. The setup is familiar and comfortable, but when SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs think they've killed someone, everything changes instantly. The lighting shifts, the music becomes ominous, and the character's behavior transforms from silly to genuinely panicked. This sudden shift is more effective than if the episode had been dark from the beginning, because the contrast makes the darkness feel more extreme. SpongeBob's disturbing moments are also effective because they often employ psychological horror, rather than relying on monsters or explicit scares. Psychological horror is often more disturbing than physical horror because it deals with internal fears and mental states that feel more personal and more real. Anyone can imagine being chased by a monster, but that scenario feels fantastical and distant. Psychological horror taps into fears we actually experience in our daily lives. Rock Bottom is pure psychological horror. The episode doesn't feature any monsters or supernatural threats. The horror comes entirely from SpongeBob's situation: being lost, being unable to communicate, being unable to escape, and feeling increasingly helpless as time passes. These are fears that viewers have actually experienced in some form. You've felt lost before. You've felt like you couldn't communicate with people around you. You've felt trapped in situations beyond your control. The episode takes these real anxieties and amplifies them. I Had an Accident uses psychological horror by exploring isolation and agoraphobia. The episode shows how fear can become self-perpetuating and how isolation can feel like safety, even when it's actually harmful. SpongeBob locks himself inside, not because of any external threat, but because of his own fear. The prison is entirely psychological. This is more disturbing than if he were locked inside by an actual villain, because it shows how people can become trapped by their own minds. Are You Happy Now depicts depression with uncomfortable accuracy, showing Squidward unable to find joy in anything despite his best efforts. The horror here is existential. The fear that nothing will ever make you happy again, that you've lost something essential about yourself that you can't get back. This psychological realism makes the episode disturbing in ways that are harder to shake off than simple scares would be. The show also takes advantage of surrealism and absurdism to create unease. Surreal content can be disturbing precisely because it doesn't follow logical rules. When reality breaks down and impossible things start happening, it creates a sense that anything could happen, and that the normal protections and expectations we rely on no longer apply. SpongeBob uses this technique frequently in its stranger episodes. Spongehenge becomes surreal when it jumps thousands of years into the future and reveals that everything SpongeBob knew is gone. This temporal jump doesn't make narrative sense within the episode's established reality, but that's what makes it effective. The episode breaks its own rules to show something genuinely unsettling about time, mortality, and the impermanence of everything. The surreal ending sticks with viewers precisely because it's so unexpected and inexplicable. The absurdist elements in episodes like Graveyard Shift also contribute to their effectiveness. The hash-slinging slasher story follows horror movie logic, building tension through specific rules and signs. But the payoff is absurdist. The mysterious figure is just someone looking for a job, and Nosferatu is randomly flicking the light switch for no explained reason. This combination of genuine tension building and absurdist resolution creates a unique feeling that's both funny and unsettling. Animation itself provides unique opportunities for creating disturbing content that SpongeBob takes full advantage of. Animation allows for visual distortions that would be impossible in live action. Characters' faces can become grotesquely detailed or abstractly simplified, depending on what the scene requires. Bodies can transform in ways that look painful and wrong. The underwater setting allows for physics-defying moments that add to the surreal atmosphere. The close-up shots, where characters' faces become hyper-realistic and grotesque, are only possible in animation. These moments create discomfort through the clash between the normal, simplified character design and these sudden bursts of detailed ugliness. Your brain has to process this visual disconnect, and that processing creates unease. Live-action shows can't create this specific type of discomfort because real faces are always realistic. The transformation sequences in I Was a Teenage Gary work because animation can show impossible physical changes in ways that feel visceral and wrong. Squidward's body distorts and reshapes in ways that would be difficult to depict convincingly in live action, but animation makes it look painfully real. The medium allows the show to push body horror further than it could in other formats. SpongeBob's disturbing moments are also effective because they're unexpected within the context of children's entertainment. Viewers don't anticipate that a Nickelodeon cartoon will genuinely unsettle them. This lack of expectation means viewers aren't prepared emotionally for darker content when it appears. They haven't put up the mental defenses they might have for a show that's obviously supposed to be scary. When one-course meal depicts Plankton attempting suicide, it's shocking partly because viewers don't expect a children's cartoon to go there. The show violates an implicit contract about what kinds of content are appropriate for its format and audience. This violation creates discomfort that goes beyond the content itself. It's uncomfortable that this content exists in this particular show at all. The episodes that feature psychological abuse, like A Pal for Gary, where SpongeBob refuses to believe Gary is being hurt, are disturbing because they show beloved characters behaving in ways that feel fundamentally wrong. SpongeBob is supposed to be kind and caring. Seeing him gaslight his pet and allow harm to come to Gary violates everything we know about his character. This character violation creates cognitive dissonance that's more unsettling than scary scenarios with unfamiliar characters would be. The mean-spirited humor in episodes like Choir Boys works as a source of discomfort precisely because it's presented as humor. The episode wants you to laugh at Squidward's suffering, but the suffering is extensive enough and cruel enough that laughing feels wrong. This creates a tension between what the episode is asking you to feel and what you actually feel. And that tension is uncomfortable in its own way. SpongeBob's disturbing moments are also effective because they often lack proper resolution. Many disturbing episodes end ambiguously or with unsatisfying conclusions that leave viewers uncertain about what actually happened. I Was a Teenage Gary ends with everyone back to normal, with no explanation of how or why. This lack of closure means the disturbing elements aren't fully dispelled. The questions and unease linger after the episode ends. Spongehenge never shows SpongeBob escaping the cave or reuniting with his friends. The episode just ends with the implication that he spent the rest of his life in isolation. This absence of resolution means viewers can't fully process and move past what they watched. The disturbing implications remain open and unresolved in a way that makes them harder to forget. The show's willingness to let characters suffer without immediate relief also makes disturbing moments more effective. Rock Bottom lets SpongeBob stay trapped and scared for most of the episode. The show doesn't cut away to show his friends looking for him or provide reassurance that everything will be okay. It commits to showing SpongeBob's experience of being lost and scared, and that commitment makes the fear feel more real. The technical craft behind these episodes also contributes to their effectiveness. The sound design, the music choices, the animation quality, the voice acting, all of these elements work together to create specific moods and feelings. Graveyard Shift succeeds because every technical element supports the horror atmosphere. The music is genuinely creepy. The lighting creates real shadows and darkness. The voice acting conveys actual fear rather than cartoon fear. What makes SpongeBob's strange moments particularly effective is that they prove the show is capable of creating genuine emotion and atmosphere when it wants to. The disturbing episodes aren't accidents or mistakes. They're examples of the creators deliberately using all the tools at their disposal to create specific effects. The fact that a silly cartoon about a talking sponge can genuinely unsettle viewers demonstrates the skill and craft involved in making the show. The disturbing moments work because they treat viewers with respect. The show doesn't assume children can't handle darker content or more complex emotions. It creates content that can be genuinely unsettling while still being appropriate for its audience. This balance is difficult to achieve, but when done well, it results in content that resonates with viewers across different ages and stages of life. The effectiveness of SpongeBob's disturbing moments ultimately comes down to contrast, craft, and commitment. The contrast between the show's usual cheerful tone and its occasional dark moments creates impact. The craft involved in using animation, sound, and storytelling techniques creates atmosphere and emotion. The commitment to actually showing discomfort rather than immediately undercutting it with jokes creates lasting impressions. These elements combine to make SpongeBob's strange moments more effective than they have any right to be in a children's cartoon about a sponge who lives in a pineapple. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. These technical and creative elements explain how the disturbing moments work, but there's still a question of why they stick with us so persistently and what role they play in our memories of the show. Section 12. Why these episodes stick with us. The disturbing episodes of SpongeBob SquarePants have stayed in viewers' memories for decades, often more vividly than the show's typical comedy episodes. People who watched these episodes as children can still describe specific scenes and how those scenes made them feel. Adults rewatching the show find themselves remembering these darker moments with surprising clarity. Understanding why these particular episodes have such staying power reveals something important about how memory works, how childhood experiences shape us, and what role contrast plays in creating lasting impressions. The primary reason these disturbing episodes stick with us is the violation of expectations they represent. Human memory tends to hold on to experiences that deviate from patterns much more strongly than experiences that fit expected patterns. If you go to school every day and nothing unusual happens, those days blur together in memory. But if something unexpected happens on one particular day, you remember that day distinctly. The disturbing SpongeBob episodes worked the same way. Children who watched SpongeBob regularly developed strong expectations about what the show would be like. They knew SpongeBob would be cheerful and optimistic. They knew the episodes would be colorful and silly. They knew that any problems would resolve happily. Their brains created a pattern based on dozens or hundreds of episodes that all followed similar formulas. When an episode like Rock Bottom or I Was a Teenage Gary suddenly violated that pattern by being genuinely unsettling, it created a memory marker that their brains flagged as important. This pattern violation triggered stronger memory encoding than typical episodes received. The brain essentially said, "This is different and unexpected. We need to remember this." The emotional response to the disturbing content further strengthened the memory. Emotions and memory are deeply connected in human neurology. Experiences that create strong emotions, whether positive or negative, get encoded in memory more deeply than neutral experiences. Fear, unease, and discomfort are strong emotions, so episodes that triggered those feelings created strong memories. The contrast between SpongeBob's usual bright, cheerful aesthetic and the darker tone of these episodes made the darkness more memorable. If you watched a show that was always dark and scary, individual scary episodes wouldn't stand out as much. But when a show that's normally happy and safe suddenly becomes unsettling, that shift creates a jarring experience that memory holds on to. The visual contrast matters too. Rock Bottom looks completely different from typical SpongeBob episodes, with its dark purples and blacks replacing the usual bright yellows and blues. This visual distinctiveness makes the episode easier to remember. Nostalgia plays a significant role in why these episodes continue to resonate with adults who watch them as children. Nostalgia isn't just about remembering the past fondly. It's a complex emotion that combines memory, longing, and sometimes discomfort. When adults revisit SpongeBob, they're not just watching a cartoon, they're accessing memories of their childhood, of coming home from school, of watching television before responsibilities and anxieties complicated their lives. The disturbing episodes become particularly powerful nostalgia triggers because they're associated with strong childhood emotions. An adult rewatching Graveyard Shift doesn't just see an episode about a ghost story at the Krusty Krab. They remember being 7 years old and feeling genuinely nervous while watching it. They remember what their living room looked like when they watched it, what time of day it was, how the episode made them feel. The episode becomes a portal to a specific moment in their past. This nostalgic connection means that even episodes that were uncomfortable or scary in childhood become valuable as adults. The discomfort is part of the memory, part of the authentic childhood experience. Adults often seek out these episodes specifically because they remember them being different or strange. They want to revisit that feeling and see if the episode still has the same effect. Usually it doesn't, which creates its own interesting experience of recognizing how much they've changed since childhood. The disturbing episodes also stick with us because they created shared cultural experiences. Many people born in the late 1980s through the late 1990s watched SpongeBob during the same period. They saw the same episodes at roughly the same ages. This created a collective memory that people can bond over decades later. When someone mentions Rock Bottom or Graveyard Shift in an online conversation, others immediately know what they're talking about and can share their own memories of watching those episodes. These shared memories create a sense of generational identity. People recognize others who grew up during the same era, partly through shared references to SpongeBob episodes. The disturbing episodes become particularly useful as reference points because they're distinctive and memorable. Saying you remember SpongeBob isn't particularly meaningful because millions of people watched the show, but saying you specifically remember being scared by I Was a Teenage Gary, or confused by Spongehenge, creates a more specific connection with others who had the same experience. The episodes stick with us because they often address themes that remained relevant as viewers grew up. Rock Bottom is about feeling lost and unable to communicate in an unfamiliar environment. Children might experience this when separated from parents in a store or on the first day at a new school. But adults experience it too when navigating bureaucracies, dealing with technical support in foreign call centers, or feeling out of place in new social situations. The episode's theme has universal and timeless relevance. I Had an Accident explores isolation and fear of the outside world. As children, viewers might have connected this to fear of getting hurt playing outside. As adults, they might connect it to social anxiety, agoraphobia, or the temptation to withdraw from the world when it feels overwhelming. The episode's emotional core remains relevant across different life stages, which is why it continues to resonate with viewers who return to it years later. The psychological accuracy of episodes like Are You Happy Now? Makes them memorable because they depict real mental health experiences that many viewers eventually encounter directly. A child watching Squidward's depression might not fully understand what they're seeing, but they remember the episode's mood and Squidward's behavior. Later, if they experience depression themselves or see someone they care about struggle with it, they might suddenly understand that episode in a new way. The episode becomes a memory that gains meaning retroactively. The disturbing episodes also stick with us because they represented moments when SpongeBob felt like it was treating its audience with respect. Children are often aware when entertainment talks down to them or assumes they can't handle complex emotions. When SpongeBob presented genuinely unsettling content, without excessive hand-holding or immediate reassurance, it signaled that the show trusted its audience. This respect creates positive associations, even with content that was uncomfortable to watch. The episodes demonstrated that children's entertainment could be more than just simple and safe. They showed that cartoons could create real atmosphere, could tell stories with genuine emotional weight, could make viewers feel complex emotions. For children who wanted to be taken seriously and who craved more sophisticated storytelling, these episodes proved that desire was valid. The episodes suggested that wanting entertainment to challenge you and make you think was acceptable and worthwhile. The ambiguity in many disturbing episodes contributes to their lasting impact. Sponge ends without clearly explaining what happened to SpongeBob or how Bikini Bottom became abandoned. I Was a Teenage Gary doesn't explain how the transformation reversed. This lack of closure means viewers' brains keep processing these episodes long after watching. The unanswered questions create cognitive loops that keep the episodes active in memory. When stories provide complete closure, your brain can file them away as finished. You understand what happened, why it happened, and how it resolved. But when stories leave questions unanswered, your brain continues trying to create explanations and fill in gaps. This ongoing mental processing strengthens the memory and makes the story more likely to surface in your thoughts randomly. The disturbing SpongeBob episodes often provided just enough information to create questions, without providing enough to answer them. The episodes stick with us because they created specific visual images that became iconic. The image of Count Orlok from Graveyard Shift flicking the light switch is instantly recognizable to people who watch the episode. The grotesque close-ups of infected wounds from the splinter are hard to forget even if you want to. The dark, angular architecture of Rock Bottom creates a distinctive visual that remains clear in memory years later. These iconic images work as memory anchors. When someone thinks about disturbing SpongeBob episodes, these specific visuals come to mind immediately. The images are distinctive enough that they don't blend together with other content. You can distinguish Rock Bottom from any other SpongeBob location instantly because it looks so different. These visual anchors make it easier to recall the episodes and discuss them with others. The episodes also benefit from the internet's role in preserving and amplifying childhood memories. Online communities dedicated to SpongeBob allow people to discuss their memories and discover that others had similar experiences. Someone who thought they were the only person disturbed by Spongehenge can find entire discussion threads of people who felt the same way. This validation of their experience makes the memory feel more significant and worth preserving. The creation of memes and references based on these episodes keeps them active in cultural circulation. Images and quotes from Graveyard Shift appear regularly on social media. People reference Rock Bottom when describing feelings of being lost or out of place. These ongoing references mean that even people who haven't watched the episodes in years encounter reminders of them regularly. The episodes can't fade from memory when they're being constantly reinforced through cultural references. The disturbing episodes stick with us because they represent a specific moment in SpongeBob's history when the show was at its creative peak. Many of these episodes come from the first 3 seasons, which are widely considered the show's golden age. Viewers who loved the show during this period develop strong attachments to this era's content. The disturbing episodes become part of a larger package of memories about when SpongeBob felt fresh, creative, and special. These episodes are also remembered because they sparked conversations and created shared experiences at school or among friends. Children would discuss which episodes were scary or weird. They would warn each other about particularly disturbing episodes, or compete over who was brave enough to watch them without getting scared. These social interactions around the episodes created additional memory layers that made the episodes more memorable than if children had watched them alone. The episodes stick with us because they challenged the boundaries of what children's entertainment could be. They tested limits and occasionally crossed lines that viewers didn't expect children's shows to cross. This boundary pushing created memorable moments precisely because they felt transgressive. When one-course meal depicted plankton attempting suicide, it violated implicit rules about appropriate content for Nickelodeon. That violation made the episode impossible to forget, even for viewers who wished they could. Looking at the ranked episodes we discussed, each one sticks in memory for specific reasons. I Was a Teenage Gary is remembered for its transformation sequence and body horror. Rock Bottom is remembered for its oppressive atmosphere and SpongeBob's extended suffering. Graveyard Shift is remembered for the hash-slinging slasher story and the Nosferatu ending. I Had an Accident is remembered for SpongeBob's isolation. One Course Meal is remembered for its dark premise. Each episode created specific memories tied to specific elements. The disturbing episodes of SpongeBob SquarePants stick with us because they were genuinely effective at creating emotional experiences that went beyond typical children's entertainment. They violated expectations, created strong emotions, featured distinctive visuals, addressed themes that remained relevant across life stages, and sparked social conversations. They demonstrated respect for their audience while pushing boundaries in ways that felt daring and meaningful. These episodes became part of how a generation understood storytelling, emotion, and the possibilities of animated television. They proved that cartoons could be sophisticated and could create real atmosphere and genuine feelings. They showed that children's entertainment didn't have to be simple or safe to be valuable. They created memories that lasted because they offered experiences that were unique, unexpected, and emotionally resonant. Revisiting these episodes as adults provides an opportunity to see how our perceptions have changed. Episodes that terrified us at 7 might seem tame or even funny at 25. But they remain valuable because they represent authentic moments from our childhoods. They're artifacts of who we were and what affected us. They connect us to our younger selves and to others who shared similar experiences. They remind us that we've grown and changed, while also showing us what remains constant in how we engage with stories. The disturbing episodes of SpongeBob SquarePants earned their place in our memories by being bold enough to make us feel genuine emotions, creative enough to present familiar characters in unfamiliar situations, and respectful enough to trust that audiences could handle complexity. They stick with us because they deserved to stick with us. They were more than just random dark moments in a comedy show. They were carefully crafted experiences that demonstrated what SpongeBob could achieve when it fully committed to creating something distinctive and meaningful. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.